On the other side, with the loss of 2 CP0 Division Captain, the remaining members of the Donquixote family were totally unable to resist the attack of Haruden and others, not to mention the attacks done by Ross. After a short while, only 2 or 3 Donquixote main family members were left and the other cadres were basically dead and wounded. Whiz! Ross's figure flashed past, and Happy Spring in his hand cut across the rock giant Pika. His observation haki accurately captured his physical position and killed him. With the death of Pika, the Donquixote family was completely defeated. Both Rode and Stanson recovered their original form and their bodies were filled with many injuries. The strength of Donquixote family's cadres and the highest cadres were still of a certain level. Even though they had very high defense, they could not remain intact under siege with an enemy. As for Haruden, his injuries were much lighter and he was only slightly injured. The Rumble fruit is close to invincibility, but not completely invincible. There is almost no completely invincible devil fruit in this world. Captain Ross, what you want is brought. Just after Ross killed Pika, Lafitte came out of the rubble, carrying a small box with legitimate carrots in it, the Hobie no Mi ability user Sugar. Good job. Ross sensed Sugar's situation and nodded at Lafitte. Sugar's ability can still play a big role in some cases. Last time, he also wanted to capture Perona for this reason, but that was interrupted by Aokiji. He doesn't know if she was caught by Marine or went someplace else. This time, he will not lose Sugar. After Law confirmed Doflamingo's death, the hatred in his heart finally dissipated, but he was not confused nor lost as now he had only one identity, Ghost Hand Pirate's Surgeon of Death. Ross, the dwarves' race found this. Robin came up from a distance and there was a little blood on her shoulder, but the injury was not serious. She was the only one on the ship who occasionally called Ross by his first name. Walking next to Ross, Robin took out a delicate devil fruit. Barrier fruit. Ross looked at the exquisite devil fruit, which consisted of a small layer of bicolored barriers, and his mind flashed as he immediately thought of something. Robin nodded and smiled. It should be something that Donquixote family got and haven't had the time to give it to anyone. It was the right choice to kill Doflamingo. Ross slightly smiled. Now Haruden and other giants have increased their experience of actual combat and he also got the barrier fruit, plus Sugar. It can be said that their overall strength has increased dramatically. However, now is not the time to stay and count the harvest. A Marine Admiral is likely to arrive at any time. Dressrosa is still a place of right and wrong and is under the world government. At least for the time being, they can't occupy it as their place. It's time to go. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Ross nodded and immediately ordered the evacuation and a group of people quickly retreated toward the area where their ship was located. Kaku and others have already taken the lead, but when a group of people crossed the ruined street and quickly retreated toward the coast, something that Ross expected but was not a good thing happened. Buzz. The brilliant golden light cut across the horizon, from Dressrosa's shore with the incredible speed as it shuttles towards the ruins of Dressrosa, rushing to catch up. Marine Headquarters Admiral Kizaru, you go first. Ross's face remained unchanged when he saw the golden light coming towards him. Kizaru was bound to arrive here sooner or later with his speed, but as long as he had killed Doflamingo, it was already too late. Now, he is no longer the same person he was in the Sabaody archipelago. At that time, it was necessary to use the ability of Sonic Boom to make a short-lived fight with Kizaru. But now, even if the odds are low for him to win, if he wants to retreat, then Kizaru won't be able to stop him. Then we'll withdraw first, Captain. Be careful. Lafitte and others are very aware of the gap between them and a Marine Admiral, and now it is not the time to fight with a Marine Admiral. Everyone except Ross has been injured and their stamina consumption is also very serious and they are temporarily unable to support a second battle. Haruden and other giants wanted to support Ross, but eventually, they pulled out. Whiz. Kizaru tried to go straight ahead of the crowd and stop everyone, but Ross's figure flashed as his observation haki caught Kizaru in advance and blocked him. The 25 talent proficiency points that Doflamingo provided were decisively put to observation haki by Ross. To deal with Kizaru, Kenbenshoku, observation, is more important, and with the addition of 25 points, his Kenbenshoku, observation, proficiency has reached 125 points and he is basically at the same level as a Marine Admiral and he can capture Kizaru's movements more clearly. Really, can you stop tossing around like that, ghost-handed pirate regiment? Kizaru, who was stopped, frowned. His tone was still the habitual and wretched voice, but his face was very depressed. Killing a Tenryuubito. killing Shichibukai Doflamingo, broadcasting the Dressrosa event to the world. Every single one of these things is worse than other, and not to mention him, even Sengoku has to be severely reprimanded by the 5 Elder Stars and has to take some responsibility. Ross looked at Kizaru and said in a calm tone, "Then let me ask you, why did the Marine and the government frame me? I just wanted to be an ordinary pirate hunter." "Ordinary pirate hunter?" Kizaru reveals a look that said, "Stop kidding me here. When you were in the Sabodi archipelago, you made me lose a lot of face. If I don't catch you this time, I really won't be able to explain this to the world government." Kizaru knew that Ross was delaying the time, but he did not try to bypass Ross to chase Lafitte and others and slowly said, "Whiz." Just as his voice fell, Kizaru took a step forward and kicked Ross in front of him with a golden swing of his legs. The speed was so fast that the average person could not even notice what had happened. Even today, Ross still couldn't reach this level of speed, but his observation hockey can perceive it ahead of time. Boom. Ross folded his arms in front of him, blocking Kizaru's kick, and the power of distortion stiffened the laser explosion. Then Ross kicked back, his leg wrapped in the power of distortion, to Kizaru's waist. Key. Kizaru's body instantly became golden light, then he condensed on the right side of Ross, his fingertips flashed and he shot 4 or 5 lasers with explosive power towards Ross. Ross looked calm and punched back with his backhand. Bang! With a violent sound, the laser exploded and Kizaru and Ross both retreated and withdrew from the envelope of the aftershocks. This seemingly equitable short encounter, but it makes two people's moods have a completely different change. Ross is relieved. He has determined his power of distortion. It is indeed at the level of a Marine Admiral, enough to make a frontal collision with it, and will not fall into any major disadvantage. Kizaru is shocked. He was amazed at Ross's strength and speed. He was sure that Ross was far from as strong as he is now in the Sabodi archipelago. In just over half a year, Ross's strength had soared to this extent. How did he do it? Your strength has actually increased so much. It's horrible. It seems that I really can't let you continue sailing again. Kizaru squinted. His figure suddenly turned into a light and he appeared behind Ross, kicking towards him at a very fast speed, forcing Ross to resist. Bang! The golden light exploded like a heavy cannon, destroying a piece of ruins in an instant. Zephyr commented that Kizaru relied too much on his devil fruit and rarely practiced body techniques, but Kizaru's glint fruit has the qualifications to be relied upon and his laser explosion attacks have great power. Whiz! Ross's figure rushed out of the explosion area and the dark-colored hat pressed tightly against his head. After blocking Kizaru's blow, Ross pulled out the happy spring from his waist and slammed it out. Kizaru captured Ross's attack intentions in advance, and his figure split from the middle into two, turning into 2 golden lights flashing toward the rear, avoiding Ross's attack. As a Marine Admiral, there is no reason why he would not be able to elementalize in advance. Aokiji was pierced by Whitebeard in the war and he used Kanbanshoku, observation, to capture the attack in advance and reacted, leaving himself unscathed. Ama no Murakumo, Sword of the Gathering Clouds of Heaven. Avoiding Ross's attack, Kizaru wiped his hands together and turned them into a golden sword, splitting up against Ross. Ross was not afraid and he also waved his sword, Ching. The 2 sword attacks collided in the air, first sparkling like the sound of gold and iron, and then the power of distortion and the flash of explosion collided, making a violent sound. Ross holds his sword in both hands. Although he is not proficient in sword arts, his close combat fighting is also a skill that involves all kinds of attacks with the sword. With the power of distortion, even if each sword attack seems ordinary, but it has enough power to kill a vice admiral in seconds. Ding ding. Kizaru uses his extremely fast speed to constantly collides with Ross. Glint fruit is also extremely aggressive in attacking. In addition, it has already been developed to an extreme point and only awakening it will increase its power now. Using his powers, he can compete with Ross and shuttle constantly in the ruins. Kizaru waved his sword as a sword broke out. Ross's eyes flashed and he kicked backward toward Kizaru, who was also attacking with his raised legs. But Ross's power of distortion surged, turning Kizaru's entire body into a golden light that smashed into the ruins in the distance, triggering a violent explosion that destroyed several buildings around him. Just as Ross was trying to retreat, a golden light shot out of the smoke and ran straight to Ross's back. Ross was forced to avoid it. Then a few golden rays came out of the smoke. Kizaru held up a finger and slowly stepped out of the smoke without any damage. Marine Admiral is Marine Admiral after all. Ross defeated the incoming laser and his eyes flashed. The last time he used his ability to create flaws and made Kizaru suffer a small loss. This time, he is also going to use every single trick he has to create flaws. Although it seemed like he was fooling around, but in fact, Kizaru has been in a state of complete seriousness, and a completely serious Marine Admiral can reveal very few flaws. After all, his Kendenshoku, observation, and armament hockey are extremely strong and his speed is at the peak of this world. The last time I was playing around, you used this trick to escape from me. If I were to be messed by your little tricks again, where would I put my old face? Kizaru seemed to see through Ross's thoughts and said his sentence with carelessness, and then he once again turned into a golden light and slammed toward Ross. Ross waved his sword. They fought a big battle and soon reached the video range of Den Den Mushi, fixed on some ruins by Kaku and others. The picture continued to be broadcast to the whole world. That's Marine Admiral Kizaru. Did a Marine Admiral really go out to deal with Ghost Hand Ross? Is this the so-called justice of Marines? Someone looked at the scene in the picture and could not help speaking with sarcasm. It's easy to fool ordinary people with government influence, but in the current situation, the government and Marine can't fool them with this matter in a short time. Their prestige has plummeted in the eyes of civilians all over the world. Run. Don't let the Marines catch you. There are a few radical civilians who have even stood on the side of Ross, supporting him. A concept that is terrible for the Marine and the government. When people no longer support Marines but instead support pirate, where will their justice go? Kizaru knows that his fight with Ross is now being broadcasted, but he is helpless. He can't let Ross escape from Dressrosa. Ross must be arrested here. In any case, as long as Ross is arrested, they will have a way to suppress public opinion, shirking all blame on Doflamingo and Ross, and then use the time to slowly dilute the impact of this matter. It doesn't matter how dark the process is, they just need the results. Bang! Bang! Ross and Kizaru continued to fight fiercely in the sky, spattering a golden aftershock from time to time, and any landing on the ground can cause an explosion, even injuring civilians, which makes the Marines look even worse for people who are watching this fight all over the world. In fact, Ross also caused damage to civilians in this fight, but many people have already ignored this. A bad person who has done bad things all his life and suddenly does a good thing one day, he will be considered to have been reformed, but a good person who has done good things all his life does a bad thing one day and he will become a hypocrite. Today, Marine and the government have undoubtedly become such a person, so all the spears are pointed sharply at Marine and the government, completely ignoring the destruction caused by Ross. Oh, it hurts. Kizaru was brushed by Ross's power of distortion on his shoulder during his confrontation with Ross. Although he used armament hockey defense, his whole shoulder still suffered from an instantaneous pain. Kizaru was injured and Ross also did not get out unscathed. A big hole appeared on the cloths around his chest and abdomen area and a black mark were stuck on his skin. He seemed to have endured a laser attack. Ross had to rely on armament hockey and his rock's physique to resist it. When I see you next time, you'll feel more pain. Ross was wounded but did not show any pain. Instead, he looked at Kizaru calmly. The moment his voice fell, his whole body suddenly flashed as he flew toward the shore. Lafitte and others have already boarded the ship, and they have been off the coast for a while. Now he only needs to fly to the ship and sink it into the sea again, so they can slip away. He had no intention of fighting Kizaru, not to mention the consumption of stamina in the fight against Doflamingo. He currently cannot win against Kizaru. How could I let you escape twice in the same way? Kizaru knows Ross's intentions very well. With a flash of light in his eyes and a flip of his wrist, a beam of light shoots from his hands and bounces off the ruined streets. Yada no Kagami, 8-span mirror. Almost instantaneously, the light crossed the Ross in the air, appeared in front of Ross after a reflection, and Kizaru disappeared from the sky, suddenly coming in front of Ross and kicked him. Ross's face remained unchanged as he punched out with his right hand. Bang! After a short exchange with Kizaru, Ross kicked back and continued to retreat to the coast. Last time Kizaru could not block him, and this time he won't be able to stop him if he is giving his all in escaping. But this time, Kizaru didn't seem to have any ideas about stopping him by himself. He was just delaying his flight to the shore, by any means, in order to slow him down. Ross could not completely ignore Kizaru's attack and involvement, and his flight did become extremely slow with Kizaru's involvement. At his speed, from the bottle's location to the coast, He could reach in at most a dozen seconds, but with Kizaru delaying him, it dragged on for 10 minutes. At first, Ross thought that Kizaru was not willing to let him escape, so he tried his best to stop him and tried to inflict more damage on him. But as the fight continued, he realized that he was wrong. Because, in a previous encounter, Kizaru had a chance to give him a hard blow on the back, or even seriously injure him, but Kizaru gave up that chance and continued to go around to his front to block his escape, preferring to give up the chance to attack him on the back to block him here. Kizaru, this guy. Ross noticed something was wrong. There was no point in delaying him. He would eventually walk away unless Kizaru was waiting for someone. What kind of people can play a key role in such a situation? Aokiji? Akainu? However, this place is still a few days away from the Marine headquarters. Can it be that the Marine expected this situation as early as a few days ago, sending 2 Marine admirals to Dressrosa? It's almost impossible, not to mention that the world government has already sent the CP0 to ambush him here in advance. Even if there were no CP0 members, dispatching an admiral and several headquarters vice admiral to Dressrosa is already their limit. What is Kizaru delaying and waiting for? Ross couldn't think about it in a short time, but Kizaru wanted to stop him here, even if he gave up the chance to seriously injure him, and he could not easily break through Kizaru's blockade. 1 minute, 2 minutes, after another 5 minutes, Ross finally rushed from the original battle location to the shore of Dressrosa. By this time Lafitte and others had been sailing away from the coast for a long time, because they knew that Kizaru alone would not be able to stop Ross. If they could leave early, Ross would not have to take them with him to escape. Seeing the ship with Lafitte and others in it, it has become a tiny shadow on the horizon, almost disappearing at the end of the line of sight. Ross slightly relaxed, and after a hard fight with Kizaru, he charges towards the sea. Already at sea, Kizaru can hardly stop Ross from drilling into the sea. But, almost as soon as Ross swooped toward the sea level, a huge and terrifying sword energy suddenly came from the distant sea far. The sword cut an abyss into the sea nearly a kilometer long. This sword energy cuts up from the sea and down to Ross. Ross's face changed when he saw the sword energy. He thought of Golden Lion for the first time. But the feeling that the sword energy gave him was totally different from that of Golden Lion. It was a totally different style. Distortion Fist. Ross did not hesitate. He sank low and completely aroused the power of distortion. He smashed a hard punch at the incoming sword energy. After breaking the sword energy, he continued to rush to the sea. They're finally here. The moment Kizaru saw the appearance of the sword energy, the expression on his face finally relaxed, and the face that remained depressed all this time finally showed a relaxed and indecent smile again. After Ross blocked the sword energy, he flashed in front of Ross and continued his fight with Ross to stop him from charging into the sea again. Distortion. Sea explosion. Ross took a deep breath and knew that he was in crisis. He slammed low and gravity distortion launched against the sea. In an instant, the whole sea area turned upside down, and the seawater of nearly 1,000 meters was rolled up in a sultry way, flew into the sky and rushed over to Kizaru. Kizaru's face changed. He didn't expect Ross to have this kind of attacks. He was forced to avoid on one side. He was a devil fruit user. If he was touched by the sea, it would be a direct defeat. Whiz. Controlling the sea to push Kizaru back, Ross took advantage of his ability to push the walls of distortion apart and continued to rush downward in the frenzied waves. Almost as soon as he approached the sea, the sword energy that had appeared before, once again broke through the sea. This time, the distance it was sent out from was obviously much closer than before, and the power was also a lot bigger, spilling hard at the huge currents that Ross made. It's you. Ross's eyes flashed as he had long anticipated that the unknown sword arts user would stop him from escaping into the sea again. Without hesitation, he turned his hands over and grabbed the front end of the sword energy as if he were holding the head of a snake. Ross screamed and launched the power of distortion to forcibly hold the sword energy, and pushed it to the rear, where Kizaru was preparing to use his 8-foot mirror. Seeing that the sword energy was coming in his direction after being thrown by Ross, the wrinkles on Kizaru's face became more defined and he was forced to stop his attack to resist this sword energy. Whiz. Ross continues to charge into the sea. He doesn't know who sent the sword energy, but the strength of that person is not inferior to Kizaru, and it is not nearly inferior. It is a character close to Kizaru's level. Watching Ross use his counterattack to get rid of Kizaru and the unknown sword art's strong blockade and was about to rush into the sea, a bullet burst into the sea, shooting at Ross. The bullet wasn't very fast, but it seemed to have predicted Ross's position in advance, and it contained a very deep layer of armament hockey. The third person. Ross had a cold feeling crawling up in his heart. He expected Kizaru to appear. He even expected the worst situation. Kizaru and Aokiji appearing at the same time, but did not expect that three people with similar power level would come here. There is no doubt that this bullet was not released by the unknown sword arts user. Faced with the bullet that broke through the sea and was very close, Ross was forced to sidestep the bullet and continue to rush into the sea. Whiz! 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 3 bullets burst through the sea again, striking Ross in different directions. These bullets are not very powerful, but they seem to anticipate all Ross's reactions and evasive movements in advance, and each one hits the point where Ross would find it most difficult to deal with them. Kenban Shoku, observation, pinnacle, future prediction? A single thought flashed through Ross's mind. Under the pressure of 3 bullets, he was unable to rush into the sea and was once again blocked by Kizaru. When the waves finally faded, the 2 people who fired the sword energy attack and fired the bullets finally showed their stature. That is a battleship. The flag of the Chief of Staff, the Crane, hangs on the battleship. On the deck of battleship, the Crane stood in the center. On her left was a fair woman in a pink sleeve with slender legs and bright red lips, holding a named sword, Kanpira, in her hand, looking calmly to this side. Marine Headquarters, Admiral Alternate, Momoshagi. Standing on the right side of the Crane is a man in a tea-yellow coat with his hands in his trouser pockets, a cigarette in his mouth, and a smile in the direction of Ross. Marine Headquarters, Admiral Alternate, Tokikaki. It turned out to be them. Ross's gaze calmed down. As the Admiral candidate for the Marine Headquarters, it is natural for them to have the strength that is close to Kizaru. A current Headquarters Admiral, 2 Admiral candidates, and Great Staff Officer Suru with an unknown strength. This is hopeless situation. You almost didn't make it. Momoshagi stood beside Crane holding the named sword in her hand and breathed a sigh of relief. Tokikaki smiled and said, "It's not that I almost didn't make it, but your sword arts didn't do any better. You still need to train your skills." Momoshagi. The Crane ignored the 2. She was dressed in a Justice Clock of Marine. She stood on the deck wearing the Justice Clock of Marine, her back slightly bent. She looked at Ross from afar, her eyes slightly muddy, seemingly showing a trace of regret. She had been chasing Doflamingo for the longest time, so after judging that Ross might have been targeting Dressrosa, she rushed here in her own battleship. Momoshagi was like her sister. After hearing the news, she took the initiative to go with her. Tokikaki heard Momoshagi travel and immediately followed up. So the 3 started traveling with Kizaru. Kizaru took the first step in the emergency of Dressrosa. They just arrived. Doflamingo's defeat is not unfair, the Crane said slowly. Ross's approach has been similar so far and he always had a plan before dealing with the pirates he killed. In her judgment, it is clear that before coming for Doflamingo, he has already made various plans and there was no luck involved in his defeat. Ross looked at Crane and said nothing. In fact, the arrival of Crane was slightly predicted by him, but Momoshagi and Tokikaki would follow her has been completely beyond his expectation. The situation today is even worse than facing 2 Marine Admirals. If Momoshagi and Kizaru were the only ones, he would still be able to escape from them, but Momoshagi Tokikaki, plus Kizaru, were almost equivalent to 3 Marine Admirals standing in front of him and he is not clear about their powers. Just like Aokiji, he can still escape from Akainu or Kizaru, who is also Marine Admiral with almost similar strength, if he faced them alone, but on 1 to 3, he almost has no hope. Vice Admiral Erman, you go after the Ghost Hand pirates. Instead of dividing Momoshagi and Tokikaki, the Crane directly allowed the accompanying fleet to divide 3 large battleships and chase after Lafitte and others in the direction they left. The intention of this arrangement is to let Lafitte and others have a chance to escape, but also to leave Ross completely alone without giving him any chance. Now, Kizaru did not attack directly, Momoshagi and Tokikaki also did not continue their attacks, but even if none of them did anything, the kind of oppression they brought was still unprecedented. The fact that things have developed to the present level has exceeded the initial expectations of anyone. I am no exception, but in any case, if you continue to develop like this in the future, it will surely bring an era of uncontrollable chaos. This era cannot become more chaotic. The Crane's battleship gradually approached the coast, and she slowly said those words to Ross, with a slight regret in her eyes. No one could have imagined these consequences, turning Ross from a pirate hunter to a wicked criminal who is trying to subvert the government, but it's no longer meaningful to think about the cause when things get to this point. Even if she knew that Ross had no choice, that Ross was angry, and that she would have probably done the same in his place, she still could not make any concessions. Great Age of Pirates, it has been 16 years, and the future is on the verge of an irreversible wave of turmoil. One day, the world will be overturned. How long can you stop it? Ross floated on the surface of the sea, looking calmly at Crane. The Crane looked down at the rough sea and said slowly, "What you said may come to pass in the future, but just as you refuse to yield to the power, Marine and justice will not yield to the turbulent future." Well, we shall see. Ross's figure dropped as he charged into the sea surface. Tokikaki looked at the scene and gently shook his head and said, "Will you not come with us without a fight? So be it, we will not let you go." In the face of Kizaru, Momoshage and him, surrounded by the power of the three, everyone knows that Ross has no chance to escape, including Ross himself, but even if faced with a desperate situation, Ross, as Crane said, will never bow down to power. Whiz! Just as Ross swooped into the sea, Kizaru came out and his figure flashed in front of Ross, kicking at him. Ross punched out and the power of distortion surged, triggering explosions that rang on the sea, splashing a huge wave. Cloud-piercing. Momoshage gently grips the handle of her sword and used on Geppo, Moonwalk. She rushes toward the waves and the named swords in her hand smashes out at an incredible speed, cutting the waves into countless pieces that are still frozen. In one of the pieces, Ross was exposed. Kizaru pointed out, and a laser burst into the air and flew toward Ross. Ross grabbed the laser with his backhand and power of distortion erupted, causing the laser to fail to explode. He threw it back at Momoshage, who was flying over to him using Geppo, and he continued charging into the sea. In any case, even if both Momoshage and Tokikaki are incompetent, they can still chase him down into the sea, but as long as he can rush into the sea, he has the possibility to escape. But Ross's goal is clear enough, and Kizaru and Momoshage are also very clear about this. Alas, Tokikaki stood on the deck sighing and he pulled out a gun and fired in the direction of Ross's dive. It was Kenbenshoku's extreme prediction ability that every bullet was fired at Ross's weakest point, forcing Ross not to rush into the sea. Blocked by Tokikaki, Momoshage and Kizaru continued to rush toward Ross. Kizaru is obviously the most powerful and Momoshage's movements are a little slower. Her expression is calm, but her eyes are still a little bit complicated. As for Tokikaki, he only blocks Ross when he breaks through Momoshage and Kizaru. Even so, Ross can't get out of the encirclement. The gap in combat power is too great. With his current strength, even in full swing, the results of 1-to-1 matches with Momoshage and Tokikaki are unknown, let alone 1-to-3, and Kizaru is fast enough to be abnormal. Even though Momoshage and Tokikaki were not very militant, Kizaru's face-to-face encounter with him still blocked all his escape possibilities. 4 free talent points. How can I use them to seize the opportunity? Ross keeps going from left to right, and his thoughts are flashing, but no matter how he uses them, it seems to be a desperate situation. Even if his strength surges by 1 or 2%, as long as Momoshage is fully committed, she will be able to equalize the situation again, and even if his strength increases by 2 or 3%, Tokikaki will try his best and still be able to suppress him. Give up, you can't escape. Momoshage slightly shook her head and said to Ross as she watched the scars and bloodstains gradually appear on his body, but he still showed no signs of giving up. Tokikaki also stood in the air using Geppo, Moonwalk, and said, "There is no hope for you at all. Any more struggle will be meaningless, give up. If you can still run away from the 3 of us, you can even come and go from the Marine headquarters as you wish." Kizaru formed a triangle with Tokikaki and Momoshage, surrounded Ross in the middle. Now, at the outskirts of Dressrosa's ruins, many civilians also gathered. They could not help but clench their fists as they watched the battle not far from the shore and the siege laid by a Marine Admiral Kizaru and others on Ross. 3-on-1, it's really despicable. This is the time to clean up the mess. We don't need the Marines. Marines' pursuit of the ghost hand pirates would have been normal if they hadn't gone through anything before, but now Ross has become the benefactor in the eyes of Dressrosa's civilians and he had saved their island. And now not only a Marine Admiral but there are also 2 more people besieging Ross. For them, there's a lot of irony in their hearts. The highest battle power and they use it to suppress someone who saved us when they didn't. Many of their voices were muffled, but for Kizaru and others who are proficient in Kenbenshoku, observation, Haki, They clearly heard their words and their faces were not looking very good. However, there are 2 Marine Admiral candidates and 1 current Admiral, and they did not lose their emotional control, but Momoshagi and Tokikaki slowed down their attack on Ross and only stopped Ross when he was about to escape. Bang! Momosagi's sword energy was smashed by Ross, but it also prevented Ross from fleeing, and Kizaru turned into a golden streamer. Whiz! Ross holds the handle of Happy Spring in both hands and charges into Kizaru. At the moment, he has 2 sword marks on his body. Even with Armament Hockey's defense, plus Rock's talent, his body is still bloody, which is the case when Momoshagi is not fully committed in attacking him. In addition, Kizaru's light speed kick was applied to his shoulders, his clothes were broken and half of his shoulders were scorched black. But, even though Ross's body is badly damaged, the light in his eyes never faded, and his mind never sank for a moment. Ching! Ching! Kizaru confronted Ross's fierce attack and continued to fight with Ama no Murakumo, Sword of the Gathering Clouds of Heaven. Ross's offensive was still very fast, and he had to block every move, otherwise, he would give Ross a chance to escape. In order not to give Ross any chance to escape, he would be beaten back by the full-blown Ross. Seeing that Ross did not choose to escape, but chose to compete with Kizaru, Momoshagi and Tokikaki stood in the air, and both of them slightly shook their heads and did not attack. If Ross chooses to run away, they will try their best to stop him, but if Ross doesn't escape, they won't join forces with Kizaru to besiege Ross. As admirals alternates, they all have their own will and pride, and they are not doing this simply because of the words of the civilians. Bang! 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 Every blade that Ross splits and confronts with Kizaru's Ama no Murakumo triggers a violent explosion, and in the aftermath of the explosion, he does not retreat at all. Under Ross's almost aggressive attack, Kizaru has been retreating to resist, and he finally cannot fully withstand it. His mouth is unconsciously overflowing with a trace of blood. Really, Kizaru was not happy seeing that Momoshagi and Tokikaki didn't come to attack Ross and left it to him, but because of his position as an admiral, it's hard to call Momoshagi and Tokikaki to siege Ross with him. What's more, with Ross's current state, he will barely have any stamina left and his injuries are quite serious. If he cannot defeat Ross even now, then there is no need for him to go back to the Marine headquarters. Yada no Kagami, 8-span mirror. Kizaru flickered in the golden light and arrived behind Ross at an incredible speed and kicked out with a violent kick. Ross slammed his elbow against Kizaru's foot, but Kizaru was faster. With a flash of light on his foot, he offset a little bit and kicked Ross in the upper arm. Boom! Ross flew out and squatted on the shores of Dressrosa. Coming to the shore, with Momoshagi and Tokikaki not far away, Kizaru feared that Ross would try to run away and wrinkles appeared on his face. He charged toward Ross on the shore. Bang! 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 Kizaru showed the fearsome strength of a Marine admiral and suppressed Ross in the downwind with one man's strength. Of course, Ross has been injured and his stamina is almost spent from the continuous battle, but this battle also showed him the true strength of Kizaru as a Marine admiral. Give up, even if you try everything, you still won't win. Kizaru slammed his feet and grabbed Ross's flaws. He kicked Ross back again and said with a tight voice. Give up? Ross rose slowly from the ruins, even though his mouth was bleeding, but his eyes remained unchanged. Even with the presence of the Marine Admiral Kizaru, even with his almost exhausted stamina, even with Momoshagi and Tokikaki standing behind Kizaru, even if this is a desperate situation, he will never give up. Distortion. Cut. Ross held his sword in both hands and slashed hard at Kizaru. Kizaru saw that Ross's stamina was almost exhausted. He rushed over with a relaxed face and waved the Ama no Murakumo sword in front of him to parry the coming attack, and sword in his hand and collided with the power of distortion. ZZ. The golden light would have normally disintegrated like debris, but currently, the Ama no Murakumo sword cut Ross's power of distortion bit by bit, pressing against him bit by bit. Tokikaki put his gun back to his waist, and Momoshagi put away her named sword. It's over. Some of the civilians of Dressrosa closed their eyes, some clenched their teeth and clenched their fists, but they couldn't do anything. Even if they wanted to help Ross escape, they didn't have that ability. They could only watch as Kizaru's sword began to oppress Ross's sword and reversing Ross by little. Desperate? Yes, desperate. Is this the end? No, it shouldn't end like this. It won't end like this. His stamina is almost exhausted and he has almost lost the battle as Kizaru's Ama no Murakumo sword inches closer and closer to Ross's body. Even in this desperate situation, He will not give up, his will must remain unshakable. Suddenly, a terrible power suddenly burst out of Ross's body. It was not the limit that broke through after exhausting physical strength. It was the power that was originally hidden in Ross's body. Under the pressure of this desperate situation, with his unwavering will, it was thoroughly inspired. At the moment when this power appeared, the heavens and the earth seemed to become quiet. The civilians of the Dressrosa in the distance, who were clenching their fists and teeth, became fixed on a single spot for a moment, and like dominoes, they began to fall one after another, and only a few people were able to keep their consciousness. On the gradually landing battleship, the marine soldiers who were about to disembark were all fixed on the spot before beginning to fall down one by one. The faces of Momosagi and Tokikaki changes seeing this scene. Haoshoku Haki. Kizaru bears the full brunt of this violent Haoshoku Haki, causing him to feel strong oppression on his body. He feels as if a large stone has been tied to his body and he can barely move. As a marine admiral, he has experienced the Haoshoku Haki of the Yonko, 4 emperors, among which Akagami, red hair, is the strongest, and today's Ross broke out with Haoshoku Haki, although it is slightly inferior to a Yonko, 4 emperors, but it is like a wild adult wolf that had been set free. However, Kizaru was not surprised that Ross had Haoshoku. Is it the first awakening? The power hidden in his body is terrible, but what if you awaken your Haoshoku? You can't use it consciously and you will still lose here. He was not afraid, because Ross's stamina was almost exhausted, and even if he awoke this terrible power, he could not turn over any waves. That's right. As Kizaru has judged, Ross's stamina was almost exhausted. Even if he awakened Haoshoku Haki, he did not have any power left to continue the fight. But this Haoshoku Haki is not just imposing, it also represents Ross's will. Ross held the happy spring in both his hands and he erupted with Haoshoku Haki with the last of his stamina. There was no retreat in the eyes, just battle intent. Kizaru, take this. Buzz. The power of distortion emerged from Ross's body. This is Ross's overdraft stamina. This is the outbreak of Haoshoku's oppression. This is Ross in despair. This is the strongest blow on display. Kizaru's face changed dramatically. He didn't expect Ross to attack with such power in this situation. Because he was oppressed by Haoshoku Haki and is very close to Ross, he couldn't avoid it. Distortion collapse. Bang. The power of distortion broke out like a tsunami. It's twisted into a smash, like a landslide, sweeping toward Kizaru. Kizaru's Ama no Murakumo sword completely melted into light, and Kizaru was also turned into a dots of light, flying backward, running through 5 or 6 buildings in a row and finally crashing into a special building made up of sea stone. Finally, the Ama no Murakumo sword was completely turned into a light scatter. Kizaru was also turned into a group of light that was blown up by Ross's attack and flew out toward the rear. After running through 5 or 6 buildings, he slammed into a special building made up of sea stone. The light instantly collapsed and returned to Kizaru's form. The impact could no longer be removed and his back was hit hard, causing him to spit out blood. Pop. Kizaru fell to the ground and his clothes were broken, including the Justice Clock of Marines, and the word, justice, was destroyed. He coughed violently, and once again, a mouthful of blood spilled out of his mouth. He barely stood up and a distortion appeared on his wrinkled face. On the other side, after delivering the attack, Ross's stamina was completely spent as he used all of his powers in his last attack, and the last remaining stamina was squeezed out. Ross, who was seriously injured, held the somewhat broken happy spring in his hands and slowly inserted it into the ground in front of him. He held his sword hilt in both hands. Stand still. Great Age of Pirates, 16th year in February. 7 warlords of the Sea Doflamingo, as well as the Donquixote family, suffered a full-scale invasion by the Ghost Hand pirates and they were wiped out. The Dressrosa regime returned to King Riku's family. The Ghost Hand pirates' captain, Ghost Hand Ross, got surrounded by the Marine headquarters Admiral Kizaru, and the great staff officer Suru, the alternate Admiral Momosagi, the alternate Admiral Tokikaki. He was eventually defeated. The news spread and the world shook, for the captured pirate. Marine generally has 2 methods of disposal, one is execution and the other is imprisonment. Generally, for devil fruit users, they are eternally imprisoned in Impel Down, such as Golden Lion, World Destroyer and so on. Their devil fruit powers are too uncontrollable. After killing them, the devil fruit will regenerate on the sea after some time. If they are obtained by other pirates, there will be another fierce, wicked existence. On the other hand, for the fierce, wicked pirate, Eternal imprisonment in Impel Down is even more fearsome than the threat of death. Each layer of the prison is specially designed to look and feel like hell so that even if prisoners can't die, they can never get rid of the hell-like fear until their natural death. Naturally, if the person caught is the cadre of the subordinates of any Yonko pirate group or the cadre of the Whitebeard pirate group, they will most likely be directly executed, lest Yonko, 4 emperors, run to invade the Impel Down. For the captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates, Ghost Hand Ross, Marines and the government finally made a decision to imprison him in Impel Down, forever, Yonko, 4 emperors, territory. Red Hair Shanks drank the wine and took a copy of the latest newspaper that had just been sent. So, he was defeated. He was stunned as he looked at the newspaper. It was a completely unexpected result. For someone like Ross who was wild and dared to face the government and Marines, he was defeated by Marine. The newspaper article, without accident, pushed all the bad events of Dressrosa onto Doflamingo, pointing out that Ross was one of the culprits of Dressrosa's destruction and was routed and arrested by Headquarters Admiral Kizaru, who arrived in time. In Sabo de Archipelago, he ran away from Kizaru after killing a Tenryuubito ran and that same person got defeated and captured by Kizaru. The government is reporting some messy things. Beckman sat next to him, holding a newspaper and smoking a cigar. There are no mentions of the Crane, Momosagi, and others in the newspapers, but anyone can guess that Ross's captured wasn't as easy as it was reported in the newspaper. Akagami, Red Hair, was silent for a moment and threw away the newspaper. No matter how it happened, Ross was arrested and according to the newspaper, he will be detained and impelled down for the rest of his life. That is to say, his premonition seems to be a failure. Whitebeard territory. Bullshit news. After reading the newspaper, 4th Division Captain Thatch threw the newspaper aside. 1st Division Captain Marco looked at the newspaper for a long time. Ross's uproar over Dressrosa was still evident. They also saw the content of the broadcast at that time. Finally, they saw Kizaru arriving, but Ross's response was obviously calm. How did it suddenly got turned around? Why did the news say that Ross got defeated and captured by Kizaru? Judging from Ross's tremendous momentum in the Dressrosa incident, both his strategy and strength are extraordinary. He should not be a person who is easily captured by Marine. Father, what do you think? Marco was silent for a moment and turned to look at Whitebeard. Whitebear took a huge glass and took a murmuring breath. What the government said was all bullshit, but it should be true that the kid was caught. He shook his head. Ross was defeated by the Marines. It was beyond his expectation. When Ross stepped into the new world with a bounty of 1 billion berries on his head, he thought that he could turn the sea upside down and even walk up to him. He didn't expect that everything would stop here. Being imprisoned in Impel Down, no matter how prestigious and honorable he was before, everything will become history and eventually, he will be forgotten and buried by time. As for the jailbreak or something, the only person in history who has escaped from Impel Down is the Golden Lion, who lost 2 legs in the process and has not been seen for more than a decade. 100 Beast Kaido was slightly annoyed and shattered the newspaper. How did that kid got caught by Marine, such waste? He still wanted to see what kind of guy Ross was who dared to provoke him. Even if he didn't think that Ross would be his opponent, Ross was already captured before he can start looking for him. It's a pity that I couldn't take that guy's head with my own hands, but even when I was locked in Impel Down, I couldn't get out. Let's just forget it. One of the 3 disasters sitting next to Kaido said. Kaido poured a mouthful of wine and said, "That's it. After being caught and pushed in Impel Down, I am too lazy to go and look for him there. No one needs to mention that name anymore." On some island. 2 hours after the Dressrosa incident, CP0 chief arrived and boarded the island to search for Tenryuubito Myasgard's location across the island. With the efficient action of CP0 and the collaboration of a large number of government elites, Tenryuubito Myasgard was quickly found in a low house. Myasgard was tied to a bomb. He was not dead yet, but he could not bear the psychological pressure and was in a coma. "Get out of the way." CP0 chief spoke quietly, letting the crowd get away. He took down the bomb at a very fast speed and threw it out. The bomb slammed outside and exploded. After saving Myasgard, the government members behind him rushed quickly and put him on a stretcher. The accompanying medical team immediately set out to check the situation of Myasgard. Seeing the result, everyone's faces changed. They saw that Myasgard was still alive, but there was a hole in his chest and his heart was missing. He was still breathing normally without his heart. It is the ability of surgeon fruit. CP0 Chief's face became very depressed and the people around him were afraid to even breath out loud. They were played by Ross from the beginning to end. They have successfully saved Mjosgard, but his heart is missing from his body. What is the meaning of this rescue? The life of Mjosgard is still in the hands of ghost hand pirates. Den Den Mushi. CP0 Chief took a deep breath and took the Den Den Mushi from his subordinates and dialed 5 Elder Stars. He suppressed his anger and reported the matter. Gorosei, 5 Elder Stars, were also silent. It was unexpected that Ross had been caught by the Marines, but now there is such a problem. Mjosgard's heart was not in the hands of Ghost Hand Ross. It seems that it must be with his crew. Did the Marines caught them? I am terribly sorry, Lord Gorosei, 5 Elder Stars. Marines said that they were still chasing them. Trash. The Gorosei, 5 Elder Stars, showed a little annoyance on his face. That group of people will definitely make a fuss about the heart. Maybe we have to let go of Ghost Hand Ross. Absolutely impossible, one of them said with a serious tone. Someone sighed. If they ask for that kind of request, maybe we can agree to it, and arrange a heavy force when releasing Ross, capturing them all. It won't be that easy. Gorosei, 5 Elder Stars, wearing a white robe, shook his head and said, what if Ross escaped even with all of our preparation? What would we do then? In general, the requirements of ransom can be promised, but it is absolutely impossible to release Ghost Hand Ross. As long as Ross is not there, the Ghost Hand pirates will amount to nothing. Sooner or later, they will be arrested one by one. The last Gorosei, 5 Elder Stars, words were conclusive. Somewhere on the sea. A pirate ship is anchored at sea. On the deck of the ship, Lafitte and Law are surrounding a table with a beating heart. They didn't agree to let go of Captain directly. They have to get the heart first and trade at the same time. This is no doubt a trap, Lafitte said helplessly. Law calmly said, the structure of Impel Down. I have studied it according to intelligence. With a few of us alone, there is basically no possibility of intrusion. Robin is silent. Recalling the memories of the moments when Ross has shown confident eyes in front of impossible odds, she could not believe that Ross was caught by Marine. When he was still weak, Aokiji struck and Ross escaped from him, but he fell in Dressrosa. Can't you come out? Is this really over? Marine Headquarters? In a closed room, Headquarters Vice Admiral Doberman is holding a copy of intelligence, the latest intelligence about Ross. The report says that Marines had completed the delivery and transferred Ross to Impel Down prison. It's over. Doberman put down the intelligence and lay down in the reclining chair. His gloomy, depressed face finally showed an expression that could not be described in words. Being detained in Impel Down prison on the deepest level 6 eternal hell. Ross can now only wait for his death in silence, and his name will be slowly swallowed by time. No one in the sea will remember Ross. After all, Doberman snorted, and a fulfilled smile slowly appeared on his face. The smile revealed a little slyness and a little happiness. He has never had such pleasure since the accident with Ross started. Although he can no longer fight, he is still a Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral, who approves documents every day and can play chess and chat at other times. And Ross? He won't be able to walk free anymore. He is imprisoned in Impel Down and the darkness will be his only companion. This is the end of the violation of justice. This is the end of him as a pirate. This is the end of his fight against Marine and the government. A white city. The Revolutionary Army leader Dragon, wearing a green cloak, was sitting on a stool, holding a newspaper in his hands, looking at the contents of the newspaper with a depressed look on his face. During this period, the Revolutionary Army has developed rapidly, and the reason is that Ross had severely torn apart the dark side of the government and severely damaged the prestige of the government and Marine. But Ross was arrested. Despite the Battle of Dressrosa before the arrest, the prestige of the government in the world has been hit hard by an unprecedented degree, but this will be the last time that something like that would happen. He sent his intelligence personnel to inquire about the intelligence of Ross's escorting ship, trying to block halfway, but the intelligence content he heard was that Crane, Momosagi, and Tokikaki were escorting Ross to Impel Down. Even if he sent all of his men, it is impossible to break through this level of defense, and if he went out personally, the situation will be even worse, because the entire route of the Marine escort ship is very close to the Marine headquarters. Pity, Dragon finally put down the newspaper and sighed. But even if Ross's era is over and the Ghost Hand pirates will soon become history, the aftermath of the Dressrosa incident is still slowly expanding and their revolutionary army can quickly develop the forces with this help. We can only do this. In the world, All the forces were still reeling from the aftereffects of the Dressrosa incident, for the defeat of Ghost Hand Ross, for him being captured by Marine, and for him being imprisoned. Ross was handed over by Marines. With sea-stone shackles on both his hands and feet, he entered the Impel Down. Pushing forward into the prison, the interior is dark, full of frightening atmosphere. From the depths, he can occasionally hear a roar and a sad scream, which makes people shudder. But Ross's eyes remained calm. Squeak. The doors of Impel Down slowly closed and the last rays of light disappeared. The darkness eventually enveloped everything. After the events of Dressrosa, Ross was completely exhausted. He was shackled in sea-stone chains and on the way to Impel Down, he was only given a little bit of fresh water to survive. Ross's wounds did not show their ability to recover when his stamina was severely spent and he could not recover. The wounds on his body has only been initially healed up to now. Ghost Hand Ross, a big pirate with a bounty of 1 billion. As a pirate with a bounty of up to 1 billion berries, the queue for escorting Ross is also extremely luxurious. Vice Superintendent Hannibal, Deputy Warden Domino, and Jailer Sadie. Jailer Sadie looked at Ross, who was slowly moving forward in shackles, with an exciting look on her face and said, "He looks like an ordinary person, but since he's a pirate with a bounty of billion berries, he should be able to withstand heavy interrogation. I can't wait any longer, hee." She had no interest in the monsters imprisoned in level 3 or 5, and ordinary people can't withstand her torture. Someone like Ross is the most perfect prisoner for someone like her. "I'm not going to give you such a dangerous person to torture as administrator, Sati." Hannibal glanced at Sati, then put her hand on her mouth and said, "Such ambitions aren't good. As vice superintendent, I have to abide by the rules of Impel Down." Boring. Sati grinned and was too lazy to pay attention to Hannibal. The crowd moved slowly, accompanied by the sound of shackles rubbing against the ground until they came to a huge boiler. The inside of the boiler was boiling water, called the warm water of hell. Prisoners strip naked here before entering the city. They are thrown into the boiling water to disinfect, then change into prison clothes, and are escorted to the designated detention area. Oh, it's time to undress. Domino stayed outside and did not follow, but Sati followed in excitedly, with a small wicked smile on her face, staring at Ross. Two jailers came forward and tore Ross's clothes violently. Some of the newcomers' jailers were next to him. This is the first time that they had seen a pirate with a bounty of billion berries being pushed to advance and Impel Down. They looked at Ross, whose clothes were being torn apart like any ordinary pirate, and he was pushed into the boiling water. "I have never seen a pirate with a bounty of billion berries. This doesn't look great." "Never seen. Recruits, this is Impel Down. No matter how strong you were before, as long as you committed a crime and were caught here, you're just a prisoner here." A jailer captain stood in front of the queue and said in an indifferent tone. The slightly tense atmosphere, with jailer captain's words, instantly dispersed. Yes. Even if he was a strong person, he's just a prisoner now. Seeing the pirate with a bounty of 1 billion berries being treated like any ordinary person, without resistance, many jailers are no longer nervous. Gulp gulp. Soaking in boiling water for a moment, a chain was agitated by a wheel disc and pulled Ross out of the boiler, holding the shackles on his hand. Always silent, no words. Even though his body was washed by boiling water, Ross's face did not show any change. He seemed like a person who has lost his soul, with no pain, no sensation, at his disposal. Not a word. Sati looked at Ross, who looked like an ordinary person. He doesn't seem particularly strong, but every muscle is ripped on his body. She showed a more excited expression, but she can't do anything. A pirate with a bounty of billion berries is above her pay grade. After Ross changed into prison uniform, Chief Magellan appeared. "I am Chief Magellan. According to the government's judgment, you're going to be escorted to the 6th floor of Impel Down, eternal infinite hell, where you will be confined for the rest of your life." He looked at Ross without any pity in his eyes. In his view, this is the price pirates like Ross should pay for their actions. Ross did not respond. Seeing that Ross was like a piece of wood and had no response to everything, Magellan lost all of his original interest, shook his head and waved to his subordinates. Soon, Ross was escorted to the 6th floor of Impel Down under Magellan's personal escort. In the 6th floor of Impel Down, there are countless strong people who once galloped the ocean. Many pirates with a bounty of more than 100 million berries are not eligible to enter this floor. Most pirates here have a bounty of 230 million berries, or even more than 500 million berries. Hey, there comes a newcomer. Very respectable appearance, he is qualified to be detained on the 6th floor, he should be a great character. Many people in the darkness looked up at Ross, who had been escorted in, with all kinds of eyes, but most of them did not know Ross. Ross has only been famous in recent years, but in recent years, not many pirates have been detained on the 6th floor of Impel Down. Hey, newcomer, how much is your bounty? Someone was sitting in prison and shouted at Ross with a boring look. Ross did not respond. He kept his head down and walked silently until he came to an empty cage, where handcuffs and shackles were all fixed on the larger seastone chain, and connect the entire cage to the Impel Down as a whole. Oh, separate cell. A prisoner on the 6th floor noticed something unusual and could not help showing a little difference. The prisoners advancing the 6th floor of Impel Down are also divided into upper and lower levels. Generally, 200 or 300 million berries pirates are not held in isolation, but are divided into groups of 2 or even 3 and are held in the same cage. There are not many people on the 6th floor who are eligible to enjoy solitary confinement, and each of them is a great person who once shocked the world. If I remember correctly, that guy seems to be Ghost Hand Ross. His bounty was 200 million berries. Someone looked at Ross, vaguely thought of something and whispered. When the people next to him heard what he said, they immediately turned their heads and looked at him with a bland expression. Only 200 million? Separate prison? You made a mistake? When were you locked in? That news is too old. When I came in, he seemed to have a bounty of 440 million berries and he was the most popular supernova. In the cage not far away, a pirate snorted. His hanging bounty is only 230 million berries. Although he is New World's pirate, he is far less famous than Ross when he was locked in. Naturally, Ross, a pirate who is famous all over the world before he even entered the New World, made May pirates unhappy, he included. Now that Ross is captured, he is a little happy. The most dazzling supernova, what about it? Isn't he the same as us, to be caught by Marine? Detained in Impel Down. They are all prisoners. Even if it's 440 million, it's too much to be in solitary confinement. Has he done anything else? I don't know that. Many pirates of Infinite Hell were awakened and looked at Ross in his separate cage. Shut up. Magellan listened to their talk, and finally couldn't hold back. He shouted angrily at the crowd and said with a cold face. Don't talk in my ear. Ghost Hand Ross doesn't do anything worthwhile. But his bounty is 1 billion berries, more than the waste like yours. 1 billion. Hearing this reward, there was a silence in the Infinite Hell. Many people have been shocked. Even those pirates with a reward of 670 million or even 780 million have revealed a little bit of disbelief. This motionless, wood-like newcomer has a bounty of 1 billion? Interesting. In the deeper part of the darkness, there are voices that seem to have not been spoken for many years. Some beings open their eyes and take a slightly interesting look at this side. Can you tell me what this kid has done? Magellan. I don't have time to accompany you in your nonsense. Magellan responded coldly, closing Ross's door and leaving Infinite Hell with his subordinates, leaving countless strange eyes on Ross's cage. Wearing a prison uniform, sitting alone in a separate cell. It wasn't until Magellan and others took the elevator to leave the 6th floor that Ross lifted his head a little. He calmly looked at the heavy seastone shackles bounding his body. For him, being captured and imprisoned in Impel Down is within his calculations. This is his last insurance plug because he is very clear that if he ever lost to the Marines, he will not be directly executed, but will be imprisoned here. There is more than one way to get out of here. Whether it is 6 years later when Luffy will make a big rush throughout Impel Down, or by activating the living system, unlocked, in the talent system, or the battle systems, life return, Seimei Kikon, and the General Department's water element affinity, all of them can help him get out of these seastone shackles. But this method can only be used once. Once he went out from here, he would expose his resistance to seastone to the world. Marines and the government will deal with him in a different way later. He will be executed on the spot after they catch him again, and he will not be detained and Impel Down again. In other words, if he chooses to go out from here and continue to be an enemy of the world, there can be no more mistakes, no way back, no failure. Let's do that first. Ross breathed, closed his eyes slowly, and did not immediately break the chain. Now his injuries have not fully recovered, his stamina is exhausted and his physical fitness is low. Even if he immediately break free, there will be no recovery time and he cannot fight against Magellan in his current situation. Next, he will wait patiently, waiting for his body to recover, waiting for the best chance. Hey, newcomer, You are called Ghost Hand. How is it on the outside now? What big news has happened recently? Can you tell me about it? There is nothing to do here and I am going to die of boredom here. In a prison, some of the prisoners returned to their normal habits after the shock of Ross's bounty subsided, and one of them asked Ross some questions. Here is eternal hell. This is no crimson hell where bladed trees torment prisoners, no wild beast hell where various dangerous animals torture prisoners, no starvation hell where prisoners are tormented with hunger and heat, no blazing hells hot, no freezing hells ice cold. This is just endless loneliness. Even if you were strong in the sky and crossed the sea and saw countless amazing things, once you enter here, you can only stay alone in the cage, facing the passage of time until the end of your life. And so, as soon as newcomers come here, many of the pirates being held here will ask them what happened outside, listening to their story, and barely have fun for the boring days. Ross didn't talk, he still sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. Someone saw Ross's appearance and could not help but frown. What is with this guy? Is he a piece of wood? Were we fooled by Marine? Who knows? Others also shook their heads. Throughout the history of the sixth layer of Impel Down, almost no one can be as calm as Ross when they were locked in. Screaming loudly, yelling to let them go out, yelling at the prison, saying that once they go out, they will destroy it, or they will speak well and will be embarrassed. In short, there are no appearances like Ross, so numb and indifference. Ross's performance is not like someone who has just been locked in. It is like someone who has been locked up for more than 10 or 20 years and has become numb to his situation for a long time. Hey, boy, I am talking to you. Are you deaf? When the pirate who spoke to Ross noticed that Ross completely ignored him, he couldn't help but yell at Ross and said, "Just because your bounty is 1 billion, you won't talk to the likes of us with less bounty?" Buzz. No one knows which pirate got annoyed and used Hushoku Haki to oppress the cell where Ross is. Although many of them are pirate with a bounty of 200 or 300 million berries, there are even pirates with a bounty of more than 500 million or even more than 600 million berries here. There are also a few people who have Haoshoku Haki. Let him get a taste of real power. When that Haoshoku burst out, there were people grinning in the darkness and another Haoshoku intertwined and came agitating towards Ross. Generally, those who are locked into the 6th floor, those newcomers who are particularly disobedient and likes to shout and make noise. Everyone gets annoyed, but they still have a way to teach them a lesson. That is Haoshoku Haki. A person's Haoshoku Haki is of little use, but if multiple people intertwined their Haki and erupted at the same time, they can create a frightening momentum. Buzz. 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 It is like a stone that stirs up 1,000 waves. To use Haoshoku Haki to teach the disobedient newcomers a lesson, this is almost the consensus of many pirates in Eternal Hell, or use it when they encounter some new people yelling all day, bothering and annoying them. At this moment, at least 6 or 7 Haoshokus sprang up and rushed toward Ross's cage. Haoshoku intertwined and collided in void like a black thunderbolt. This Haoshoku Haki, although some of the Haoshoku Haki channels were scattered and not perfectly controlled, others were well controlled and eventually all intertwined in Ross's cage. The heavy Haoshoku Haki seemed to have filled Ross's cage like seawater for an instant. The repressed ones are completely incapable of breathing. The pulsating Haoshoku even makes the chains squeak and slams, and it hits Ross's body, trying to tear the prisoner's clothes of Ross. In this heavy pressure, Ross opened his eyes. He glanced indifferently at the direction that Haoshoku Haki came from, and from his body erupted Haoshoku Haki that is stronger than the 6 or 7 coming towards him, and it slammed out. Do not reach out for a yard after taking an inch. This time it was a real Haoshoku conflict. The sea stone chain on Ross squeaked, and the black lightning in the air was intertwined, swaying the terrifying aftermath and heading in all directions. Eternal Hell is noisy again. What should we do? What can we do? Let them go at each other, or would you rather go down there? Inside Warden Room, wardens, who are monitoring the Eternal Hell on the 6th floor, cannot help but change their faces and swallow their saliva when they see this scene. Haoshoku clashes in the Eternal Hell can be seen as long as they stay long enough. Although these people are now shackled and imprisoned, the horrible Haoshoku alone shows how fierce the criminals were. ZZ. The Haoshoku conflict in Eternal Hell gradually subsided. Hey, is that Hushoku? Someone said that and slowly looked back at Ross's cage. Since Ross had Haoshoku, their little trick didn't mean much to Ross. If Ross does not have Haoshoku, they can barely control Haoshoku to press against Ross, but if Ross has Haoshoku, they will not be able to do this. It will form chaotic Haoshoku conflicts, intertwined, unable to concentrate, and no one will be able to do anything. Forget it. Let's wait for the next newcomer. No one knows who said it, but many prisoners gradually recovered their gaze. Eat and drink. The meals delivered in eternal hell are made of the sea king-like meat captured by the blue gorillas. They have very high calories and energy. Although the total amount is not much, it still makes Ross's body gradually improve and his body gradually heals. As time went by, his body recovered day by day. Occasionally, he looked at the prisoners in the prison around him and showed his hunger for the points. Half a month later, the 6th floor of Impel Down welcomes a newcomer from the New World with a bounty of 330 million berries. After being imprisoned, it was not calm and it took some time and external help for him to calm down. This prisoner was not as difficult to communicate as Ross and soon chatted with people in the same cell. In the process of chatting, he also talked about Ross killing Tenryuubito, killing Shichibukai Doflamingo, broadcasting the dark side of the government in Dressrosa to the world. One after another thing has been said from his mouth, and the prisoners in eternal hell have also been amazed by the deeds of Ross. It's not easy and damn near impossible to kill a Tenryuubito and then escape Sabodi Archipelago. How did he do it? Almost all of the pirates present had experienced Sabodi Archipelago and Tenryuubito, but most of them chose to be patient. Nobody wanted to play against Sabodi Archipelago and Marine Admiral. His journey was really dazzling. Someone listened to the story with a surge of emotions. He clenched his fist and said, "I would have also killed a Tenryuubito if I was out, the waste was not good enough." One of the people next to him scoffed mercilessly and said, "Cut the crap, depending on your skill, after killing a Tenryuubito, you would have been beaten to death by an admiral." Pity. Someone looked at Ross's cage and shook his head. It's dazzling enough, but it also attracted too much hatred from the government and Marine too early. No wonder it wasn't a long journey. If he would have crossed through it, he may have been able to replace one of the 4 emperors. The people next to him heard it and they all sighed. That pirate spoke again. "That's not to say, if I hadn't been caught, I would probably have killed one of the Yonko, 4 emperors, by now." The people next to him laughed and mocked and said, "Save it. I'm afraid you wouldn't even be able to see 4 emperors in front of you. It's just out of a bit of boredom that they can have fun with each other." On the other side, in a separate cell, Ross sat quietly. His injuries had completely recovered, but since a small portion of food and fresh water was rarely supplied each time, his physical energy was not recovered. His whole body is sore and weak after wearing sea stone. Ross can still judge that his physical fitness should be restored to about 60% or 70%. At this level, the next recovery will slow down because of the supply of food and fresh water. It's only enough to sustain life. Hold on, Ross is not in a hurry. Here he does not need to consider all kinds of dangerous things. This so-called prison is like a place where he can really rest. It is like going home here. The prisoners around are all talents. They can always be there to get some fun out of boredom. Once he acts, he will need to finish it all the way, so he must ensure that everything is perfect. He would rather wait for a while, wait for his body to become better. 10 days later, on the 6th floor of Impel Down, a special prisoner was sent here. Magellan, you bastard! Warden Shiryu of the Rain, wearing heavy seastone shackles, was pushed by Magellan into a separate cell and copied onto the seastone wall, which was integrated with the cage. His face was so depressed that he seemed to have been poisoned by Magellan and it had not yet been completely alleviated. "This is eternal hell. I just killed some trash. Are you going to lock me up here, Magellan?" Shiryu of the Rain looked at Magellan with a depressed face. At the moment, his toxin had not completely disappeared, and the seastone shackles were so heavy that even those who were capable could not escape. Magellan pushed Shiryu of the Rain on the wall, exhaled a poisonous mist, and said indifferently, "I am the chief of Impel Down. The lives of all prisoners are decided by me, not by you who kills them for pleasure. You will stay here and reflect on it." Shiryu of the Rain stared at Magellan and finally vomited out 2 words, "Very good. Remember, you're a capital offender now." Magellan stepped out of the cage of Shiryu of the Rain. Giving unlimited detention on the 6th level of Impel Down is actually one of the death penalties, because there is no big difference between unlimited detention and direct execution, and the former is even more tortuous. Shiryu of the Rain stopped talking and looked coldly at Magellan closing the prison door, closing his eyes and sitting in the darkness. Now, almost all the prisoners who were pushed in Impel Down prison looked at this side in amazement. Someone wants to say something, but because of Magellan's suffocating poison suffocation, he swallowed it, and it was not until Magellan left the 6th floor that there was an uproar. Hey! It's Shiryu of the Rain. The warden of Impel Down is now the same as is. Prisoners of eternal hell? Ha 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 ha, interesting. A lot of people grinned and looked at Shiryu of the Rain's cell with a mockery on their faces. This man was still outside looking at them like they were insects some days ago. For them, it's interesting if a new person comes in. But now that new person is the warden of Impel Down. Although it's not clear what exactly happened, it's only necessary to know that Shiryu of the Rain has become a prisoner like them. Sitting in the dark, Shiryu of the Rain looks cold and doesn't say anything. No one knows who was the first to erupt a Haoshoku haki, and then, like the storm rainstorm, 7 or 8 Haoshoku haki emerged and stormed away towards Shiryu of the Rain. Shiryu of the Rain is a master of sword arts. He is also affected by his body condition as he still has toxin residues in his body. He has not recovered. Under the impact of the violent Haoshoku, there is still a vague pressure. The feeling of sinking into the sea. Depressed. Although these did not cause any substantial harm to him, but it made him extremely uncomfortable. He was angry when he suddenly turned from warden into a prisoner. Now he is ridiculed and oppressed by the prisoners on the 6th floor. It is like suppressing a volcano. And at this time, a voice was sent from the prison opposite him. Noisy. The voice was very cold. At the moment of the launch, a strong Haoshoku haki broke out, and the combination of the 7 or 8 Haoshoku was destroyed for a moment, and the air was humming. Shiryu of the Rain slightly glanced up and looked up at the opposite cell. Ross, who is tied to the heavy seastone chain, is sitting there, and Haoshoku haki gradually converges from his body. He looks at Shiryu of the Rain and said slowly, "If you can go out, what do you want to do? Going out?" Shiryu of the Rain hasn't thought about it yet, but Ross reminds him that he is aware of his situation and is likely to never get out. Since Magellan has imprisoned him in eternal hell, it was obviously not a joke. This time it was a real thing. I am afraid there will be no chance of being released. Shiryu of the Rain lowered his head and said nothing. At this time, the aftermath of the Haoshoku conflict also slowly dissipated. The people in the nearby prisons first wondered why Ross would actually favor Shiryu of the Rain, and then they heard Ross's words. "Go out? If I go out, I must destroy the Marine headquarters? I want to kill Whitebeard." The prisoners around them began to bite their teeth and open their mouths, but soon some of them sat back down and said, "Don't dream. It's impossible to get out of here. The only case of escaping from here is Golden Lion, who lost 2 legs more than a decade ago, and after Golden Lion escaped from prison, the defense here became tighter." Many people shook their heads and sighed. For a time, the atmosphere in the whole eternal hell became depressed and no one came to laugh at Shiryu of the Rain and, dreaming, to escape from Ross. Ross did not care about the reactions of many prisoners. In fact, most of the prisoners on the 6th floor were extremely fiercely wicked, slaughtering civilians and destroying Citytown on the island, killing a city full of people just because they could not find alcohol. In comparison, Shiryu of the Rain is also addicted to killing, but as he said, he is killing the garbage of the sea. As for the subsequent killing of warden jailer, anyone who was a warden and was imprisoned in the eternal hell for several years, I'm afraid he will have to carry a knife to kill after coming out. The anger and hatred in his heart can't be erased by 3 or 2 strokes. It's totally meaningless to say what you can do after getting out. It will never happen. Shiryu of the Rain was silent for a moment, then said slowly. He knows Ross, and although he has no friendship with Ross, Ross just helped him out of the siege and he got a head start and one day to recover. Ross's faint smile. What if I could really go out? Really go out? Shiryu of the Rain fell into silence again. If he could go out, he would make Magellan look good. This ragged warden job was too long for him. He will go to the sea to kill happily. Don't be crazy about it. Wait a few more years, you won't have this idea, newcomer. Some people in the nearby prisons heard Ross's words. Some people spoke with a hint of sarcasm. Even if Golden Lion escaped, he lost 2 legs. You are far worse than him. Every person who is imprisoned had the idea of breaking out of prison, but with the passage of events, it is a little bit of despair, a little bit of elimination of this idea. Because it's impossible. Now even if Golden Lion is here, he can't reproduce the escape, because the guard is much tighter than before, and Magellan is a monster himself. Ignoring the words of many prisoners, seeing Shiryu of the Rain not talking, Ross can roughly guess the fluctuations in his heart, so he slowly said, "If I can go out, I can let you go out. How about coming aboard my ship?" Hey, Shiryu of the Rain looked up and slightly grinned and heed. Although Ross was looking for little hope, his eyes sparkled. "I know everything about you. It would be nice to go out and stir the world upside down with you." This time, the prisoners in the adjacent prison did not make any ironic sounds. They just glanced at them and then ignored them. They don't want to talk about it now. Ross slightly smiles and then he closed his eyes and stopped talking. Shiryu of the Rain slightly shook his head and thought of it as a meaningless agreement. He threw it directly behind his head, closed his eyes, adjusted his breathing and rested. With the participation of Shiryu of the Rain, not only will it be easier for Ross to escape from prison, but after that, the Ghost Hand Pirate Regiment will also have a change in strength. Shiryu of the Rain and Magellan, known as Iron Wall of Impel Down, he is rumored to be equal to Magellan in strength, but to see him defeated by Magellan and locked up in eternal hell, he should be a little inferior to Magellan, but not by much. In Ross's opinion, Magellan's strength is basically the same as that of a Marine admiral. Once he was destroyed by the Blackbeard pirates, most of his banned poisonous soldiers were the awakening of poisonous fruits. Shiryu of the Rain, as a strong sword arts expert, should be no less aggressive, his hockey speed and other aspects should be close to Admiral. The gap should be in the resistance aspect. Marine Admiral was very resistant. Akainu was attacked by Whitebeard in anger. He hammered his waist. Even then, he still jumped out and chased Luffy. He dealt with many division captains of Whitebeard pirates. Even after the event, he and Aokiji fought in Punk Hazard for 10 days and 10 nights. From those 10 days and 10 nights of the fight, it can also be seen that Aokiji and Akainu's physique is not much different. If Shiryu of the Rain was attacked by Whitebeard, he would not be able to sustain serious injuries and will lose his bottle's ability even if he did not die on the spot. Naturally, even if the strength of Shiryu of the Rain is second only to Admiral, the gap is not very big. But it is only him now. After going out from here, if he meets Kizaru again, he promises to pay a big payback to Kizaru. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, time continues to flow through. As time goes by, even though the food and freshwater sent every time are only able to sustain their life, Ross gradually regains his full potential and strength with the talent, Tenacious. The residual toxins in the body of Shiryu of the Rain have long since faded away. As a warden, his food is better than Ross, and he is basically completely recovered. Almost. On that day Ross opened his eyes and his eyes glittered slightly. The world has forgotten him for some time, and it's time for the world to remember him again. He turned his head and looked at Shiryu of the Rain, who was sitting in the dark. "Hey, are you ready to go out?" Shiryu of the Rain slightly looked up at Ross and didn't understand the meaning of Ross's words. Listening to Ross, is there a chance to go out now? But he and Ross were bound in heavy seastone shackles, and even a non-devil fruit user could not get rid of them, let alone Ross. As for the keys, they were all in Magellan's place, and no one else could touch them. After a while, Shiryu of the Rain asked with a stunned tone, "You mean you can go out now? How to get out?" Even though he talked with Ross frequently these days and knew that Ross was an extremely cool person, he was shocked to think that Ross was joking. Going out? How to get out? It's very simple. Ross's face showed a smile that Shiryu of the Rain couldn't understand. At this time, the prisoners in the nearby prison also heard the conversation between Ross and Shiryu of the Rain, blinking their eyes and showing surprise and strange expressions. What are they talking about? Going out? What is going out? Is he wants to go out? Is he crazy? Everyone is looking at Ross with inexplicable expressions. It is true that people driven mad by eternal hell are there. Is he gone mad? And just under these strange and inexplicable gazes, Ross's mind moved, and only the translucent talent system he could see appeared in front of him in an instant. There are 3 options. First, activate Life Return. Seimei Kikon. He can control his hair to try to unlock Seastone's shackles, or shrink his body out of the shackles, but the chances of failure are high. Second, activating Water Element Affinity takes 2 points of free talent points, but he's not sure how hard the heavy Seastone shackles are and whether he can break them down. He also has to break the shackles of Shiryu of the Rain and there's the possibility of him collapsing. Then, the best solution is the third, Living Talent, Unlocked. These are the questions that Ross has thought about countless times these days. He has no hesitation and spent 1 free talent point, which activated the second talent of living in addition to navigation. Buzz. In almost an instant, knowledge of all kinds of locks was instilled into Ross's mind. In a few seconds, he seemed to have opened countless locks all over the world. The sea stone chain that binds his hands and legs and the body is also full of flaws in the eyes of Ross at this moment. Gotcha. Under the restraint of the chain, Ross raised his hand slightly, put his finger in his mouth bit by bit and gently bite the front of the little finger with his teeth. He let his nails grow long for this. With his present physique, the tenacious degree of his nails is no different from that of ordinary steel. This nail is very long. He tore it down with all his strength, totally ignoring the pain. After the nail was torn off, the wound healed rapidly in the resilience of tenacious. Ross pinched the long nail and plunged it into the lock of Seastone's shackles. After exploring the internal structure, he pulled it around. Gotcha. The lock is open. Under the gaze of Shiryu of the Rain, Ross pulled the chain around him and opened the 3 locks of the handcuffs, ankles and the chains around the body with his nails. He took off all of them and stood up straight and stretched hard. Crack. The bones, which had not been moving for a long time, made a noise at this moment. They were clear here, and there was silence in the eternal hell. Ross stretched his body and came to the door, as the inserted nails turned. Dang dang. The door opened. Ross came out. This is really... Shiryu of the Rain breathed and watched Ross come out of the cage to the door of his cage, revealing an expression that seemed to have never woke up in his dreams. As for the other prisoners in the cage, they were all stunned and unresponsive. Warden Indoor. Seeing Ross come out of the cell like this, many wardens were shocked. They looked at each other, and cold sweat on their foreheads began to flow. It's a big deal. Quick report this to the administrator. Eternal hell. In Shiryu of the Rain's cell, the Seastone's handcuffs and shackles fell to the ground with a bang. He rubbed the tightened wrist and looked up at Ross. You can really get out. With a slight grin on his mouth, he glanced at the Dendenmushi, which was watching them. There is a monitor of Dendenmushi. We are already exposed. What are you going to do next? Are you afraid of Magellan? Ross stepped out of the cell and looked calmly at Dendenmushi. Shiryu of the Rain snorted. It's not your style to ask this question, but I need to get my sword back first. It should be in Magellan's storage room. Listening to Shiryu of the Rain mentioning the sword, Ross blinked lightly and said, My sword was destroyed before. Is there a good sword here? Oh, there is one, but I don't know if you can control it. Shiryu of the Rain thought for a moment and said, There is a demon blade the back of the storage room. It's useless if you don't use it properly, but that blade is one of the most powerful ones. When Ross heard that it was one of the supreme sharp blades, his eyes flashed slightly and he said, Is it a demon blade? I'm not a swordsman. It doesn't matter if it goes well or not. It can be used. That's good. Shiryu of the Rain walks up to the stairs to the upper floor, looks at Ross standing still and asks, You're not coming with me? Ross said with a faint smile and a cool look, I intend to make the world a bit more lively. Hey, Shiryu of the Rain looked at Ross and glanced at the cells around him. He guessed Ross's idea and gave him a smirk. Anyway, he is not the warden anymore, so he wouldn't care if Ross releases the prisoners or anything. Ross stopped talking, just stood there and watched Shiryu of the Rain leave. At this time, many prisoners in the eternal hell have already responded, all showing unprecedented excitement. Ross can actually open the shackles of Seastone. They can actually come out. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to escape from here. Ghost Hand, let me out. I am willing to serve under you. I want to go out too. Magellan is very terrifying. I can help you deal with him. If we all join hands, this world will be ours. Many prisoners, who could stand up, almost all stood up. Their faces were full of excitement. Especially the prisoners in several cages beside Ross. Their whole bodies were attached to the door of the prison. Ross slowly removed his gaze and looked at the prisoners around him. Unfortunately, to deal with a Magellan, I don't need your help, but you do have a role, and now it's time to contribute to your role. There was an unusually vicious smile on his face in the darkness. After a few minutes, Chief Magellan seemed to have a rolling venom running all over his body. He stepped out of the downward elevator and came to the 6th floor of Eternal Hell with a gloomy and depressed expression. However, the scene of Eternal Hell made him stunned. This is a living hell. It seems to be a real hell. Within that cage, blood and broken bones splashed everywhere, and there was blood flowing on the ground as if it had turned into a river of blood. He doesn't know how many people died here. Damn it. Magellan thought Ross would liberate more prisoners. After seeing this, his face changed slightly and his pupils shrank sharply. Many of the prisoners imprisoned in Eternal Hell are devil fruit users with special troublesome abilities. Once killed, These devil fruits will be reborn on the sea. In a way, this is no better than releasing prisoners. Ghost Hand Ross. Stop this madness. He angrily released his observation hockey and located Ross in the depths of eternal hell and rushed toward him. If Ross releases a large number of prisoners, he is confident that with the power of his poisonous fruit, he can hold the door of the 6th floor and block everyone here. But Ross did not release prisoners. Instead, he started killing them here, which is totally unexpected. So you finally came. Ross slowly said as another prisoner in the cage collapsed under the power of distortion. He slowly turned his head and looked at Magellan, who was rushing towards him. His eyes were calm and indifferent. He could not even remember who he had killed. This is the 6th layer of Impel Down, Eternal Hell, where some of the worst prisoners are held, although there is no one at the level of Yonko. 4 emperors, here, but pirates with a bounty of 230 million, or even 560 million, can be found everywhere. He had killed a pirate with a bounty of more than 800 million berries. As for the pirates with the bounty of 200 million, 300 million, or even 400 million berries, he will not receive any rewards for killing them at all. Even if he hunted pirates in the same bounty area for 4 consecutive times, the profits would diminish and he would no longer receive any rewards. After this massacre, his reward was also terrifying. 265 talent proficiency points, 3 free talent points. Even though the activation of the living system's unlocked talent cost 1 point, he still accumulates 6 free talent points, which satisfies the conditions for activating the distortion space. Poison Dragon. Magellan's eyes seemed to be bursting with anger. He didn't even talk to Ross. He rushed towards Ross and with a wave of his hand the purple poison liquefied into a purple dragon and poured towards Ross. Prisoners in eternal hell were killed like this. This responsibility must be borne by him alone. Even if he captures Ross again, he will be demoted. Wall of Distortion. Ross raised his hand and pressed it forward. The power of distortion interwoven into a barrier to block the poisonous dragon. The poison dragon rushed into the wall of distortion, instantly bursting into poison. Magellan did not stop. He continues to charge towards Ross. As soon as he opened his mouth, a cloud of poisonous clouds swung away in an instant, pouring in from all sides and surrounded Ross in the center. Buzz. Ross's hands jerked forward and the power of distortion swayed, and the poison cloud rushed away. He rushed toward Magellan and slammed it out. Magellan crossed his arms in front of him. Buzz. Ross shook his hands violently and the power of distortion swung open and the poisonous cloud was dispersed. He rushed towards Magellan again and punched him in the distance. Ross didn't intend to taste Magellan's poison. His eyes glistened and he jumped up just right to avoid the collapsing poison attack. Damn it. Don't irritate Magellan here, ghost hand bastard. Some of the survivors of Eternal Hell, who were not attacked by Ross and who were physically strong enough to resist Ross's attack, were now affected by Magellan's poison. They could not help but roar. Crash. Magellan's venom surged from all directions, leaving almost no escape routes. Ross used the wall of distortion and blocked the venom from the attack, while Magellan slammed forward with a wave of his hand and a huge squid-shaped venom smashed down. The giant poison soldier barely broke through the outer wall of distortion and spilled a little poison and burst towards Ross's face. Ross put his head on one side and the poison flew past him. System, activate distortion space. Faced with Magellan's furious attack, Ross had no time to deal with proficiency in detail and could only activate the branch of distortion space as quickly as possible. Buzz. In the talent tree, the moment when the branch of the distortion space is activated, a strange feeling is born from Ross's body. The world in front of him seems to have changed and the structure of the space and its veins can be clearly seen. And his power of distortion, as if it can touch the essence of space, let it bend and fold. Poisonous flow. Magellan noticed that Ross seemed to lose his mind for a moment. Without hesitation, he seized the opportunity and with a loud roar, the turbulent venom gushed out of him like a river, rushing towards Ross and sweeping Ross in it. Faced with the torrential poisonous current, Ross recovered from his temporary loss of consciousness. His eyes shone with strange light and he waved his hand to the poisonous stream and gently pressed against it. Buzz. A strange scene appeared. Suddenly, the turbulent flow of poison changed from 3-dimensional to a single-dimensional and the whole area curled up as if the space of this area had been compressed into a sheet of paper. Magellan was shocked but immediately took a deep breath. He suddenly flashed aside, opened his mouth and threw out countless poison balls, which hit Ross's body. Ross is experiencing the amazing feeling of folding space distortion. Faced with Magellan's blow, he reaches out a finger and pokes it right in front of Void, as if it were inserted into something sticky, stimulating the power of distortions to spin and agitate. Oh! The space is agitated by Ross, forming a head-sized whirlpool, which engulfs all the poisonous balls that come in. Ross can't break up the space of the world, but the space of the world in front of his power of distortion seems to become something like a sticky paste and elastic rubber, which can be stirred up as long as enough strength is exerted. Boom! The distortion's vortex reached a limit, terminating the rotation, resembling a spring that was forced to its limit. Then the distortion was reversed and recovered at a faster speed, and is squeezed into a dark, terrifying mass, smashing Magellan head-on. Magellan's face changed slightly as he noticed that the dark substance was his poison, but its concentration had been compressed to an astonishing degree, even he dared not touch it. Weird power. Avoiding the substance, Magellan looked calmly at Ross, who was about to start again. Whiz! As Ross stepped forward, a strange force swung open. The space between the two suddenly collapsed and he was forcibly pulled closer. Ross clearly took only one step, but in a strange way, he appeared on his right side and punched him. How could it be? Magellan's pupils shrank, and what his observation hockey perceives is so weird that it's hard to describe in words. Ross's movement can't be described in simple actions but in another weird way. Faced with Ross's unexpected approach and attack, he had no time to perform other tricks. He could only use armament hockey and his poisonous fruit to protect his body and wave his arms. Boom! Ross dropped a punch, the venom splashed everywhere and Magellan flew out. Using the ability of the distortion space to take Magellan out of the way, Ross finally had the time to call out the talent system interface and digest the rewards he just got. 265 talent proficiency points. For Ross, this will lead to a great promotion. Without any hesitation, he took the lead in putting 25 points of proficiency on Kenbunshoku and 100 points of proficiency on armament hockey. With these two increases, his Kenbunshoku, observation, and armament hockey both reached 150 points, 50 points short of maximum value, and it had completely reached the level of a Marine Admiral Aokiji. After filling up all the shortcomings with Marine Admiral, 140 proficiency points remained. Ross decisively assigned them to tenacious talent and the power of distortion. Firearms shooting. 50 close combat fighting, 100. Distortion fruit. 680 Soru of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Kami-e, paper drawing, by Marines Rokushiki, 0. Marines Rokushiki's Geppo, moonwalk, 0. Observation hockey. 150 armament hockey, 150 Haoshoku hockey, 0. The power of distortion has been continuously filled with 80 proficiency points, reaching 680 points, which has brought about an increase in Ross's attack power. As for the specific effect, it should be exerted in detail in battle. The remaining 60 points of proficiency, in order to balance the problems caused by the surge in power of distortion, was completely filled by Ross into the tenacious talent. Agility enhancement. 300, top-level strengthening. Physical enhancement. 500, maximum value. Spirit heart. 0, basic level strengthening. Tenacious. 160, high-level strengthening. Rock. 50, mid-level strengthening. Tenacious is only 40 points short of maximum value in proficiency, and for Ross, follow-up improvements are basically unimpeded. After consuming 265 talent proficiency points, Ross's strength has already changed dramatically. Before, in a one-on-one confrontation with a Marine Admiral, the odds of him winning were only 1 or 2%. Now, even if he can't crush them, his odds of winning are at least 70% or above. In the face of a Marine Admiral, his odds of winning are more than 70%, which is already a very high level. The next step, it's time for the world to really turn upside down. Ross took a deep breath and sensed that the staggering heat in his body was gradually dissipating. He shook his fist and looked at the rushing venom, and his eyes flashed smoothly. Now that his strength has been enhanced, he can test it here on a suitable sandbag in front of him. Whiz! He rushed up and fought with Magellan. Impel Down prison, storage room. This is where the prisoner's weapons and special items, such as antidotes for Magellan's various poisonous gases and poisons, are placed. Shiryu of the Rain killed the gatekeeper warden and kicked the main entrance and went to the storage room. He almost didn't have to look for it. Instinctively, he walked in one direction and saw a sword that had been placed on a shelf and had been stained with some dust. The second generation of the 21-0 Wazamono grade sword. They don't even know how to give it good maintenance. He took off the second generation Owazamono grade sword. He pulled out a handkerchief from the cabinet, wiped the dust off the handle and sheath of the sword, and pulled out the blade in half. After nodding in satisfaction, he hung it at his waist. After retrieving his sword, he turned his head and glanced at the storage room. He skillfully opened a cupboard, took out a cigar and a box of matches, lit a cigar and took a puff. After spitting out a puff of smoke, he went deep into the storage room. After crossing several cabinets, a closed door appeared in front of him. Shiryu of the Rain came to the door, pushed it open and entered. The room was very small and empty. The only thing that was left was a devilish sword in the middle of the room. 12 Seijo o Wazamono grade sword, Cursed Blade Murasama. Because of the evil spirits contained in it are too strong, it is easy for ordinary people to be affected by it, and even their temperament changed and they get more and more crazy, losing any and all reasoning. Therefore, this sword is not with the government and marine but sealed in the Impel Down prison. A warden once opened the room because of his curiosity, but he was affected by the aura of the cursed blade Murasama. When he came out with it, he cut himself down. After that, the room was strictly forbidden to approach. I don't know if that guy can use it. Looking at the sword that was inserted on the ground without a scabbard, Shiryu of the Rain puffed out a puff of smoke. He was not afraid of the evil and cursing breath carried by the cursed blade Murasama, but this sword was not compatible with him. He was not used to it and it will affect his sword arts, so it was useless. Hey, it's already fighting. After pulling out the cursed blade Murasama, Shiryu of the Rain sensed the fierce battle that is going on the 6th floor of Impel Down. He stopped staying and walked out of the storage room and headed straight for the eternal hell. Deputy Director Hannibal did not dare to stop Shiryu of the Rain. As for the other warden, they all shivered in front of Shiryu of the Rain, and they do not have any will to stop him. Marine Headquarters. Doberman is sitting in the office, listening to reports from his subordinates about the Ghost Hand pirates. They escaped again. He frowned slightly and said, without Ghost Hand Ross, the rest of the miscellaneous fish shouldn't be so difficult to deal with. What is Vice Admiral Erman doing? After Ross was detained and Impel Down, Marines and the government have been chasing after the remaining Ghost Hand pirates, but because Lafitte had Mjosgard's heart in his hand, the government and Marine were afraid to go too hard to deal with it. A headquarters rear admiral standing next to him said, the government's request is to recapture the heart of Mjosgard, and then start with them. This is too difficult. Doberman meditated for a while, putting down the papers in his hand and saying, they can't take advantage of Mjosgard's heart every time. Tell the Vice Admiral that if he sees a chance, he must wipe them out. Without Ghost Hand Ross, they are nothing. Next to him, the Rear Admiral nodded and said, it's impossible for the government to release Ghost Hand Ross. It's impossible for them to sneak into Impel Down. Sooner or later, the Ghost Hand Pirate Regiment will be completely eradicated. Doberman smiled slightly at that. And just as he was about to say something, a captain suddenly burst in from outside, saluted him, and said in a tense and hurried tone, Vice Admiral, emergency meeting. Doberman stood up, his face unchanged as he went through an emergency meeting once or twice every week. He walked outside the door and asked the captain casually what happened. An accident in Impel Down. The captain, with a trace of cold sweat on his forehead, was walking along with him and said, I heard that Warden Chief Shiryu of the Rain betrayed the Marines and tried to escape from prison with Ghost Hand Ross. The situation is critical. Doberman's footsteps instantly stopped. Marine Headquarters, emergency meeting room. Damn it, Shiryu, that guy. Sengoku stood there with one hand on the table and the other on his forehead, showing a very painful and angry expression. The consequences of the betrayal of Shiryu of the Rain were extremely serious. He is someone originally standing on the side of the government and he suddenly stood on the opposite side of the government. And most importantly, if only Ross alone tried to escape from Impel Down, then Magellan and Shiryu would have been enough to suppress him. But now there is another one who is trying to escape, and that someone is Shiryu of the Rain with the same strength as Magellan. The problem is big. Magellan alone can't resist it. In the unlikely event that Ross releases a few 6th-level Eternal Hell prisoners, the great confusion and chaos that they will cause is definitely not something that can be suppressed by Magellan alone, and it is likely that they will overturn the entire prison. Aokiji hasn't returned yet. Sengoku looked to the side, towards a rear admiral and asked. The rear admiral shook his head with cold sweat on his forehead. In the emergency meeting room, The vice admirals had already come up with dozens of plans in a matter of minutes, and battleships are already ready to head towards Impel Down. "I'd better go first, Mr. Sengoku." Kizaru took a cup of tea and stood up after a few seconds of silence. In any case, Ross can never escape from Impel Down. Although there are other pirates in the Eternal Hell, most of them have been weakened by time. Only Ross is still the youngest and with most of his strength, and no one knows how far he can go. "Okay." Sengoku nodded in silence. Nowadays, it is not the time of war. They don't need to face the pressure from Yonko, 4 emperors. For the turmoil in Impel Down, it is natural to send a powerful force to subdue the situation and not give the other party any chance. "Notify Aokiji, tell him to go to Impel Down as soon as possible and not come to the headquarters." As Kizaru walked out of the meeting room, Sengoku spoke again to the men beside him, then slowly sat down in his seat and breathed. "I hope that there will be no big problems. Impel Down. Eternal Hell. Ross and Magellan are fighting each other. After his strength has skyrocketed, Magellan has been completely suppressed by Ross alone in the Eternal Hell. Even with Magellan using the poisonous giant, he is still being suppressed by Ross and he can barely support himself. At this time, Ross could leave at any time if he wanted to, but his purpose was not limited to that. He was also looking for an opportunity to continue killing the pirates when he fought with Magellan. Hateful. Watching many prisoners die at Ross's hands, Magellan roared and manipulated the poisonous giant to rush up, trying to stop Ross, but because the poisonous giant would destroy the Eternal Hell, his movements were somewhat shrunk, which made it more difficult to block Ross. Crash bang. Ross's wrist flipped, and the poison was directly deflected, not by distortion, but by the power of distortion bending the space in front of him. Magellan's poisonous giant is something that he developed after the awakening of his poisonous devil fruit. It can erode all the surrounding materials and make all the stone and steel become highly toxic. It also has the characteristics of infiltration and erosion that will work on other devil fruit users. But this kind of erosion is limited to the substance and it cannot erode distortion caused by space. Ross's figure flashed as if he had pulled through space. He came to Magellan's side and punched Magellan. The power of distortion erupted violently. Boom! Under the power of distortion, the poisonous giant bursts out with countless poisonous liquid in an instant and scatters in all directions, as if it had turned into a whirlpool. Magellan, who is hiding in the poisonous giant, tried his best to resist the attack but still could not completely block it. He was still hit by the power of distortion. The poison splashed and flew backward, troublesome ability. Ross could not help shaking his wrist as Magellan's poison seeped through many cages and poisoned many prisoners half to death. He had just grasped the ability of the distortion space. He is not used to this ability and he is still a little afraid of Magellan's poison and does not want to be touched by it. At this time, Shiryu of the Rain returned to the Eternal Hell and stared at the scene in front of him. Venom Demon. Jigoku no Shinpan, Poisonous Giant Soldier. Hell's Judgment. No prisoners were released, but Ross seemed to have been slaughtered, a large group of them. More importantly, Magellan actually used the poisonous giant in Eternal Hell. It is almost impossible that Magellan will release this ability in Eternal Hell because once released, it can easily erode the surroundings and poison a large number of prisoners, which is difficult to control. But Magellan had already used this taboo ability. There's no doubt that Ross brought him extreme oppression, even a threat to his life before he was forced to use it. He is too strong. Shiryu of the Rain looked at Ross, who was suspended in midair, and his eyes flashed slightly. Although he originally planned to team up with Ross, he still had a plan to compete for captaincy. This is a world where strong ruled. The captain will obviously be the one who is strongest. It seems that Ross's strength is much stronger than he imagined. At least he himself is unable to pressure Magellan in the Eternal Hell to the point where he is forced to display Poisonous Giant. "Have you brought it?" Ross's voice passed over to Shiryu of the Rain. Shiryu of the Rain converges and throws the cursed blade Murasama in his hand at Ross. He said, "This is no scabbard, you can use it directly." Crack. Ross raised his hand and caught the cursed blade Murasama. Almost as soon as he held the hilt, a vaguely mad will burst out from the sword edge, rushing toward his body, resembling an imposing momentum. Killing, tyranny, madness, despair, death, the chaotic atmosphere interweaves and tries to invade Ross's mind. Buzz. Ross didn't even think about it. His Haoshoku haki fired up and wrapped itself all over the sword edge of Cursed Blade Murasama, like a grinding wheel. Cursed Blade Murasama emitted a chaotic breath for a while. Although it is a demon blade, it is only a weapon. It is impossible for it to confront an existence like Ross, who has an extremely strong will. The breath quickly regains the edge of the knife. But its sword edge is still full of chaos and arrogance, and there is a faint feeling of it wanting to break free from Ross's hand, and it is not easy to it in the palm of his hand. It's really hard to use, no wonder you didn't use it. Ross's eyebrows wrinkled slightly as he said calmly. A top swordsman like Shiryu of the Rain has not been able to make the demon blade obedient. It seems that in order to make it obedient, it's necessary to use his power of distortion along with his strong will. Cursed blade Murasama, bastard, Shiryu, do you even know what you are doing? Magellan emerged again from the venom and saw the sword in Ross's hand. He stares at it and then looked at Shiryu of the Rain. Shiryu of the Rain took a cigar and took a puff. The smoke filled his mouth. Thanks to you, I've stayed long enough in prison. Now, as you can see, I'm working with him, and then, do give me more advice on how to get out. The Sword of Distortion. Ross holds the cursed blade Murasama in his hand and ignores its failure. For him, the sword is just a tool to condense the power of distortion, not use sword arts to launch attacks. Sneer. With a swing of his sword, he seemed to cut a gap in space, and the power of distortion flew abruptly in Magellan's direction. Magellan and Ross have been fighting each other for some time now, and Magellan had already had a certain understanding of Ross's ability. At this moment, without taking this attack head-on, he decisively turned around and avoided it and once again condensed the poisonous giant, while manipulating the two poisonous streams, one left and one right to the Ross. Whiz! Shiryu of the Rain decisively stepped back. He knew the power of the poisonous giant and he did not intend to touch the venoms at all. Well, do you want to release some of the prisoners here? After withdrawing a distance, Shiryu of the Rain pulled out a half-sword and asked Ross. Ross asked, with you and me, can't we leave this hell without outsiders' help? Shiryu of the Rain grinned, swung a sword and killed a prisoner who was swearing loudly in the cell. With him and Ross, they could naturally go out even if there was another admiral in their path. Venom Road, poisonous path. Magellan tried to control the venom to not spreading too much, and he slipped silently into the venom from the poisonous giant. As the venom slipped, he came directly in front of Ross and punched at him. The poisonous giant grabbed Ross, and he put his hand on Ross's back. You can move quickly with poison. Ross had already seen Magellan's speedy movement in the poison. His eyes remained unchanged. His left hand suddenly made a motion to grab the air in front of him. It is clearly caught in the air, but it seems to have grasped something substantial and slammed it. A weird scene appeared. Magellan's poisonous palm clearly attacked Ross from behind and formed a pincer attack with the poisonous giant, but strangely the back attack hit the poisonous giant instead of Ross. Looking in the other direction, Ross's position hasn't changed. It was as if space overlaps here. Void. Puncture. Ross's eyes flashed with light as he pulled the space to let Magellan's attack fall on the giant, while cursed blade Murasama in his hand suddenly stabbed Magellan. Magellan did not hesitate to dodge backward, but at the moment when he stepped back, space showed a strange change again. The sword that was clearly going to fall was suddenly elongated from his perspective, ignoring the distance, and continued to stab him. Magellan's pupil shrank sharply, an attack with a distance that he should have been able to avoid, but his Kenbenshoku's perception was telling him that the sword appeared on his chest in some strange way through a distance that it should not be able to reach. In dismay, Magellan couldn't avoid it, only waving his arms. See. Ross's sword pierced Magellan's arm, penetrating his opponent's armament hockey and piercing Magellan's arm. What is that ability? Not far away, Shiryu of the Rain watched this scene, and his pupils shrank slightly. In his view, Ross's sword was suddenly stretched, reaching a distance of 30 to 40 meters, and piercing Magellan's body. But with his Kenbenshoku's perception, Ross's sword was still the original length, not stretched, but it was strangely close to Magellan even with that large distance. It's like the distance between Ross and Magellan, which should have been at least 30 or 40 meters, was forcibly contracted by some kind of power and became less than 1 or 2 meters. Damn it. Magellan's arm was injured by Ross's sword and he retraced backward in the venom, and the venom spread along the sword edge to Ross. Ross waved his backhand and the space of distortion was restored. The sword that looked like a strangely elongated sword also recovered to its original size. Looking at the poison on the sword edge and the wound on Magellan's arm, Ross's eyes flashed slightly. It's still not skilled enough. ZZ. The venom tried to erode the cursed blade Murasama, but the cursed blade Murasama was a supreme grade sword. Even with Magellan's poisoning awaken ability, it can't be easily destroyed, otherwise it would not be a supreme grade level sword. Ross's power of distortion poured into the cursed blade Murasama, and the venom that made the noise peeled off the blade and dripped onto the ground, dyeing the ground with a sultry color. Ghost Hand, we should go. Shiryu of the Rain watched this scene, gradually regaining his dignity and murmuring to Ross. Magellan's poison fog has eroded this eternal hell. We could be poisoned if we stay here any longer. At this time, eternal hell is already full of poisonous fog. Ross has been holding up the wall of distortion to repel the poisonous fog, plus his body can resist a little poison, so it is not a big problem for him. However, as the ability of the poisonous awakening fruit gradually penetrates into the poisonous mist as the battle progresses, the horrible toxicity contained in it will be able to seriously damage even Ross, so he does not want to touch any of that. In this confined room, Magellan's poisonous fruit is extremely terrifying, which is one of the reasons why he can compete with Ross until now. He always has to keep a little strength to deal with the poisons coming from the cracks. Wait a minute, I need to try 2 more tricks. Ross floated in the air and a sword breaks through the thick poison fog and rushes towards Magellan's body. The power of distortion is fully aroused and the sword is aiming to kill. This time, instead of using the distortion space, he actually boosted the power of distortion from the front, making everything in front of him show the shape of distortion. Crash bang. Magellan manipulated the poisonous giant and it waved its huge fists that collided with Ross. The poisonous giants collapsed from the top under the power of distortion. Magellan was once again flown out. Ross stepped out, followed Magellan, and punched with his left hand. With this punch, he gave up the defense of the distortion wall. It was an all-out blow after breaking through Magellan's poisonous giant. Boom! Magellan used his arms to block the coming punch, but the power of distortion still hit him hard. The venom was splashed and his armored armament hockey was also smashed. A mouthful of blood flew out and he fell deeper into the prison. ZZ. When Ross punched Magellan, the poisonous mist also touched his shoulder. He immediately used the wall of distortion and repelled the poisonous mist. But there was still a little swelling and ulceration on the shoulders. Fortunately, his tenacious talent has been raised to a certain extent and it can resist the slight toxicity of erosion and let the skin slowly recovers. Let's go. Ross rushed out of the poisonous mist and came to the entrance to the eternal hell. Shiryu of the Rain had already been waiting here and the poisonous fog of the ink green color was everywhere in the eternal hell. Although Magellan tried to control the poison mist and did not flood it into those cages, this kind of thing could not be done very well. Most of the cages were eroded by the poisonous fog. It seems that Magellan can't be the director anymore. Shiryu of the Rain looked at the tragedy in eternal hell and grinned and rushed up with Ross. Don't try to escape. Magellan's roar came from the poisonous mist, accompanied by a lot of venoms, coming to the entrance, trying to chase Ross and Shiryu of the Rain. Ross and Shiryu of the Rain's eyes twinkled. They turn around almost at the same time, waving their swords. Bang! Sword energy and the power of distortion were poured into the venom. Ross's power of distortion opened the venom and landed on Magellan's body, while Shiryu of the Rain's sword cut Magellan's chest at the same time, leaving a terrible scar. Magellan flew out again and fell into the depths of eternal hell. He should not be dead yet. Who cares? Ross and Shiryu of the Rain looked back at the poisonous mist that pervaded the eternal hell and regained their gaze. They turned around at the same time, leaving behind 2 shameful impressions in the history of Impel Down. At the entrance between the 6th and 5th floors of Impel Down, Vice Administrator Hannibal led a large group of jailers and guards to guard the entrance and saw Ross and Shiryu appear. Everyone was breathing heavily and showing a little fear. Warden Shiryu, no, Criminal Shiryu, and Criminal Ghost Hand Ross, what have you done to the director? Hannibal held the weapon in her arms but her voice was trembling. This fear did not come from Ross, but from Shiryu of the Rain. He was a warden here for a long time and everyone is aware of his strength. Shiryu of the Rain gave a hello and a strange expression appeared on his depressed face. Who knows? He turned to look at Ross and found that Ross also had the same expression on his face and the meaning was basically the same, so at the next moment, the 2 men rushed forward at the same time. Killing without amnesty, screams and panic swirled here in an instant. Faced with Ross and Shiryu of the Rain, even if many wardens took out their weapons such as the special seastone net, They could not put up any resistance and were destroyed by the general slaughter. The two started from the 5th floor and pushed all the way up. No one could stop them even for a moment, and the blood that flowed created a small stream and turned the Impel Down into a real hell. 40 talent proficiency points, not bad. At the bottom of eternal hell, he couldn't get any rewards out of the pirates with 200 million bounties. In the process of killing from the 5th floor till here, Ross harvested 40 points of talent proficiency. Without any hesitation, he directly put the 40 talent proficiency points into the Tenacious talent, so Tenacious talent jumped from 160 to 200, and it finally acquired maximum value. ZZ. After reaching the maximum value, the slow recovering poisonous wound on his shoulders got recovered in an instant. The healing effect of the Tenacious talent has reached a point where it can instantly heal such wounds. In addition, after reaching the maximum value, Tenacious talent also got a special final ability, that is, everything can be regenerated except the head and heart. In other words, whether his arm is severed, or other organs are broken, or the neck is severed, they can be regenerated under the maximum value's Tenacious talent. He just doesn't know how long it would take to regenerate. I should be able to resist Magellan's poison and kill him. Ross looked at the depths of Impel Down, showing a hint of speculation, wondering if he could kill Magellan before he left. He may be able to get some rewards. However, at this time, a golden light flashed from the entrance to Impel Down and rushed in and turned a figure. Kizaru arrived. It's Admiral Kizaru. Shiryu of the Rain pulled out his half-blade without showing any fear. He had long ago dealt with Kizaru and others when they had not yet become admiral. Although he hasn't fought against him for many years, he doesn't have any fears. Even if he can't beat him, it will not be so easy for Kizaru to stop him, not to mention Ross. You arrived at a perfect time. Ross took back his eyes and looked towards the depths of Impel Down and again turned towards Kizaru. How about I go and kill Magellan and you block Kizaru for a while? Shiryu of the Rain. He found out that Ross is a more dangerous person than him. Whether it is his mentality or character. He had just killed various prisoners and other wardens and he still wants to kill Magellan. Kizaru has already perceived the horrible situation of Impel Down. He only felt a headache coming in. At this moment, when he heard Ross, his wrinkled face was pulled down completely. Oh, talking about killing the director of Impel Down while I am standing in front of you. Where do you think you are standing right now? This is not a place where you can do whatever do you want. In Kizaru's view, Ross should have joined hands with Shiryu of the Rain to injure Magellan this badly. Now he has arrived. Although Magellan is badly injured, as long as he comes up in time and works with him, there is a great possibility that Ross and Shiryu of the Rain will be caught again. Ross looked at Kizaru and said in a low voice, "This is the 3rd time I've met you, Kizaru. Do you remember what I said in Dressrosa? I said that I would hurt you more if I met you again." Oh. Kizaru squinted slightly and stared at Ross. Whiz. In the next moment, Ross suddenly lifted his leg at Kizaru from a distance of about 10 meters and kicked it out. Kizaru thought it was a long-range attack and was ready to dodge, but almost at the moment he was about to dodge, the distance between the two men was suddenly narrowed. Boom. Ross kicked Kizaru on his stomach. Blood flew out of Kizaru's mouth and his face was distorted in the pain. He flew back toward the rear. He was smashed and pushed against the wall of Impel Down, creating a big hole in the said wall. His figure disappeared and people inside could see blue sky and clouds through the hole he created. Shiryu of the Rain. What do you think of the previous proposal? Ross turned to look at Shiryu of the Rain. Shiryu of the Rain mouth twitched slightly as he wanted to say something. However, at this moment, a cold chill suddenly came from outside the main entrance, freezing the sea outside the Impel Down instantly into ice. The frost spread through the main entrance and came towards Ross and Shiryu of the Rain. Aokiji. Shiryu of the Rain and Ross leapt at the same time and rushed out of the Impel Down. When they came outside, Aokiji was standing not far away. Half of the body was turned into ice and he is breathing out a white mist. Whiz. The golden light flickered from the sky and fell not far from the ice. It condensed into Kizaru's shape. There was still blood spilling from the corners of his mouth and his face was still distorted from pain. Aokiji looked at Kizaru and frowned before asking, "What the hell happened to you?" Kizaru's mouth twitched slightly and the wrinkles on his face squeezed a little tighter. "I think I knew Ross's attack methods very well, so I got careless and was kicked by Ross as a result." How could he say that to Aokiji without his pride being trampled? This is shameful. What's more, he's still a little confused, not by the kick, but just what happened to that foot he was kicked with. He has not yet figured it out. Magellan had never fought against Ross, so he kept his vigilance against Ross, but Kizaru had fought against Ross many times and he had never saw Ross use this method, so he wasn't able to figure out what had happened and how he was kicked. Let's go. Ross took a look at Aokiji and Kizaru. 2-2 will soon turn into 2-3. There was no point in continuing this play. As for the ability of distortion space, he is not familiar with it. The only thing he knows is that distorting the space requires a lot of power of distortion. Otherwise, Magellan will not only be pierced by his arm and Kizaru would not be simply kicked away. Let's go. Shiryu of the Rain also didn't want to face two admirals plus Magellan. He and Ross instantly turned into two black shadows and flew away towards the frozen ice. After we have exhausted so much effort to get you in, how can we let you go so easily? Stay here. At the moment when Aokiji's voice came out, he rushed out from the flank position. His impression of Ross still stays with the Florian Triangle Sea. Although he is wary of Ross, his vigilance is not great. Most of his attention is focused on Shiryu of the Rain. Icicle. Kachakacha. The ice spread out of Aokiji's arms and approached Ross and Shiryu of the Rain from the air at an extremely fast speed, trying to freeze the two. Ross raised his hand and grabbed the frozen ice directly. The power of distortion rushed out and the icicles burst open instantly, turning into countless ice cubes. On the other side, Shiryu of the Rain drew his sword from the sheath. Instead of chopping off the ice attack, he flashed across the air and appeared behind Aokiji. Ah! Aokiji's body had a crack in its waist and he was chopped into two segments, but it seemed that his Kenbanshoku had captured Shiryu of the Rain's action and he had elementarized ahead of time to avoid being chopped in two. At that moment, Kizaru turned into a golden light and he suddenly flashing in front of Ross, with one foot twinkling and kicking at Ross. Bang long. The foot pierced through Ross's body in an eerie way. A laser burst from Kizaru's foot and hit the ice below, causing a violent explosion. Kizaru's eyes flashed with amazement. Phantom? No. My Kenbanshoku, observation, Haki captured his real body. Just when Kizaru was stunned, Ross's body, which was like a phantom, moved sideways. It appears as if Kizaru's legs had passed through his body. Boom. Ross punched out and the power of distortions erupted in the front. Kizaru's face changed and he quickly used armament Haki for defense. His arms were stacked in front of him, but the strength of Ross's punch was beyond his expectations. It was completely unstoppable and he was directly pushed down and broke into the ice. Hey, what are you doing? Aokiji was trying to suppress Shiryu of the Rain and suddenly, he saw Kizaru being suppressed by Ross in a single move. His face changed and he was annoyed. Kizaru usually acts like a fool, but why is he doing that now? He is not serious at all. Can't he see the seriousness of the matter? Go down. Ross punched towards Aokiji, cooperating with Shiryu of the Rain. Aokiji was unable to face the attacks of Ross and Shiryu of the Rain. While resisting briefly with the ice wall, Aokiji retreated downward and avoided the pincer attack. However, just as Ross and Shiryu of the Rain got rid of Aokiji and Kizaru for the moment, Magellan finally burst out of the Impel Down. The wound cut by Shiryu of the Rain in his chest and abdomen area was wounded by straw bandaging, but the blood was still oozing out. Poisonous flow. Magellan exhaled and the venom rushed up towards Ross and Shiryu of the Rain. Aokiji saw Magellan's injuries and his eyes showed a little sadness. The wound was obviously cut by Shiryu of the Rain. It seems that Shiryu of the Rain has improved a lot over the years. Magellan, how are you? I can still fight. Magellan's face was repressed as he looked at Ross and Shiryu of the Rain. He said, "It's my responsibility as the warden to guard Impel Down and to not let the prisoners escape. I can't let them escape." Aokiji jumped up and made a huge ball of ice in the air, smashing Ross and Shiryu of the Rain and headed towards Kizaru, who had also rushed out of the ice. Borsellino, Ghost Hand Ross is handed over to you first. Kizaru opened his mouth. He is already thinking that Aokiji seemed to be doing something wrong. What is it with the Ghost Hand Ross is handed over to you first? Don't say it so easily, okay? There was hardly much time to talk in battle, especially when Ross and Shiryu of the Rain were withdrawing together. The ice ball was just broken. Aokiji joined Magellan and charged towards Shiryu of the Rain, leaving Kizaru alone to face Ross. Get lost. Ross looked at Kizaru with a blank face. His Haoshoku Haki burst out and suppressed Kizaru in an instant and then he stepped out of distortion space. After that, he came directly to Kizaru's left side and swept towards him. Kizaru now has enough vigilance against Ross, but Ross's sudden appearance next to him still shocked him as Ross was not so fast. And how did Ross come over at once? Even his observation hockey couldn't understand it. In short, it was like, whoosh, and then he flashed on his side. Boom. Faced with Ross's weird ways and speed, Kizaru did not know how to deal with him for a while and was forced to fight a defensive battle again. Faced with Ross's enhanced power of distortion, he could hardly resist it. Once again, he was flown out by his attack, this time directly into Impel Down. Magellan, who was seriously injured, had just made a few moves when he saw Kizaru flying out again. One time maybe from his carelessness, but the second time, can he still be playing around? Kizaru crashed into the Impel Down city, leaving Aokiji and the seriously injured Magellan apparently unable to stop Ross. They were simply shaken off by Ross and Shiryu of the Rain. Because Magellan was seriously injured, he was unable to catch up, and the ability of poisonous fruit is great within the closed environment of Impel Down is much worse in the outside world. Therefore, Aokiji could only watch Ross and Shiryu of the Rain join hands, drop him and Magellan on the ground at the same time, and then sweep to the distant horizon, turning into two shadows. A golden light flashed out of the Impel Down and it condensed into Kizaru's form. Kizaru saw Magellan lying there and Aokiji standing there, and for a while, no one spoke. What about those two? Did they run? Aokiji looked at Kizaru, his face darkened, and asked him, "Hey, I say, what are you doing? You couldn't stop him and was kicked twice?" Kizaru's throat moved a bit as if it was stuck in something. He actually wanted to say that it was 3 times, but he couldn't say anything when he looked at Aokiji's face. A bitter expression appeared on his face as he said, "How can you say that the strength of that fellow has changed a little bit more than before? It was as if he was stronger than me. You can ask Magellan." Aokiji looks at Magellan with a blank expression. However, Magellan was dragging his badly injured body in battle. When Ross and Shiryu of the Rain were completely gone, he was extremely angry and he fell directly in a coma. Kizaru looked down at Magellan, who was in a coma, and his mouth twitched slightly. He looked up again to see Aokiji's gaze, revealing an innocent expression. Then reported like that. Aokiji sighed. He is too lazy to argue with Kizaru and he rushed to some of the Marines. The medical team, hurry to save some people. Looking at Aokiji, Kizaru felt that his chest was blocked and he couldn't spit out. He could only wrinkle a bitter melon face and say nothing. What the hell is going on here? Seeing that Aokiji and others did not catch up, Ross slowed down after flying for a while. However, he didn't cover Shiryu of the Rain with his gravity distortion. Anyway, the other party had already used Geppo, Moonwalk. And Shiryu wasn't a girl. Ross liked him as a general potential teammate, but not to the point where he would take him flying with him. Where to go next? Shiryu of the Rain looks at Ross. From the previous battle, he has judged that he is not Ross's opponent. The gap between their strength is clear. Ross's strength is mostly higher than Aokiji or Kizaru. Since Ross is better than him, he doesn't mind being ranked second. What log pose did you find back there? Ross asked Shiryu of the Rain when Shiryu of the Rain went to take the sword. He brought a log pose with him. Shiryu of the Rain heard the words and took out a log pose from his pocket and threw it at Ross. Single arrow? Eternal pose? Ross looked at the log pose and his expression changed slightly. He looked at the direction pose was pointing to, and then combined with the position of Impel Down, his face suddenly turned a little black. That's not really an eternal pose for the Marine headquarters, is it? Do you still have other log pose? Ross looked at Shiryu of the Rain with a frown on his face. Shiryu of the Rain shook his head and said, "I only took this one. What happened? Can't we use it?" Ross's mouth twitched and he said, "It works, but this log pose points to Marine headquarters." Shiryu of the Rain's face suddenly stiffened. He didn't know anything about sailing and log pose. This log pose is also a handy one. The problem seems to be a bit serious. How about going back and taking another one? After a little hesitation, Shiryu of the Rain asked Ross. Ross said, "We can take it, but if we go back, we won't necessarily be able to get out again. I don't care much, but you may get hurt." Indeed. It's totally different to want to go back and take something. After all, they are only 2 people. No matter how strong Ross is, it's impossible for him to block 2 Marine Admiral. Any flaw in it will lead to very dangerous consequences. In my opinion, let's go to Marine headquarters. Ross took the log pose and after a little thought, his eyes flashed slightly. Shiryu of the Rain's face changed suddenly as he said, "Stop kidding me. Marine headquarters is not someplace where we can just go because we want to. Us going there is equal to going to our death." "No," Ross's eyes sparkled. "There's been such a big thing going on in Impel Down. Magellan has been seriously injured and Aokiji and Kizaru are mostly going to help deal with it for a day and a half. They won't be able to get back in a short time." Shiryu of the Rain retorted, "Marine headquarters is not as simple as you think. There are other forces besides them. Sengoku, Garp, and Akainu are not simple characters." "So what?" Ross shrugged at Shiryu of the Rain and said, "We're just going to rob a battleship. We're not going to destroy Marine headquarters. We just need to rob a battleship when they aren't paying attention to it." Listening to Ross, Shiryu of the Rain almost believed it. He thought for a moment and murmured, "But in our condition, it's too much of a risk. We will lose most of our stamina by the time we reach the Marine headquarters. In short, it's too dangerous." Ross laughed. "That's easy. Not far away is Aokiji's frozen ice. They haven't flown far yet. Ross comes over the ice and breaks it down with his sword." Shiryu of the Rain had just wanted to say that it was too slow to float this ice cube on the sea, and in the next moment, the ice flew straight up and instantly came into midair to Ross's feet. This ability does not consume too much stamina. After Shiryu of the Rain started a little, he flew over with Geppo, moonwalk, and landed on the ice. This time, his expression was uncertain. Finally, he made a decision, he said. "In that case, it's up to you. Don't put us both in jail again. Oh, if you are caught again, you'll probably be executed directly. That kind of thing only happens once." Ross faintly smiled. He flew in the direction of the Marine headquarters by controlling the ice. Marine headquarters. Fleet Admiral Sengoku stood in his office, listening to intelligence coming from Impel Down. His face grew darker and darker and he rested his hand on the table. After a few seconds of silence, he slowly left the office and came to the other side of the United Front office where Vice Admiral had gathered. The whole United Front office was silent, and the Marine Vice Admirals could roughly guess the result from Sengoku's expression, but no one spoke and they were looking at Sengoku. Doberman stood in the corner. He would like to hear better news. When he arrived at the United Front office, Sengoku laid his hands on the table and, after a few seconds of silence, raised his head slowly and looked at the numerous Vice Admiral in the office. Ghost Hand Ross and Shiryu of the Rain escaped. Impel Down's eternal hell was severely damaged. The prisoners on the upper floors and wardens were also slaughtered. Chief Magellan was seriously injured and is receiving urgent treatment. Sengoku slowly stated the report he received from Den Mushi. There was silence in the entire office. Great Staff Officer Suru, sitting next to him, put her hands on the table and put her chin on her hands. She sighed. "I didn't expect this would be the result. Our efforts are ruined. Admiral can't stop him. Impel Down couldn't contain him. And this time there's Shiryu of the Rain with him. It looks like he's mostly going to work with Ross. What will the Ghost Pirate Regiment look like? Unpredictable. Nobody dares to think about it." The atmosphere of the entire United Front office was low. "The Ghost Hand Ross should have been executed from the beginning," Vice Admiral said in a low voice. "No, they should have been defeated earlier, before they could pose a threat. Before Ghost Hand Ross stepped into the Grand Line, he should have been executed." The Vice Admirals in the office said one after another, but the atmosphere in the office remained depressed. They were not eased by their words. At this point, who should take responsibility? No one knows who does it first. They looked at a figure in the corner. Although they immediately withdrew their gazes, the people next to him looked at that figure one after another, consciously looking at the past. The person in that corner is Headquarters Vice Admiral Doberman. Faced with the people's eyes from time to time, he lowered his head and pinched his fists, his nails almost embedded into his flesh, and his face became terrible at this time. Why is it that you were able to get out of Impel Down safely? What the hell was Magellan doing? What are the two Admirals Kizaru and Aokiji doing? Why? Continue to torture him. 20 minutes later. Under the control of Ross, the ice approached the Marine headquarters at an extremely fast rate. "Are you going to fly like this?" Shiryu of the Rain seemed to have a black line on his forehead, suppressing the strange feelings in his heart, because he found that Ross had no signs of slowing down, but seemed to plan to rush. Ross didn't answer Shiryu of the Rain's question, but instead asked an irrelevant question. "Would you use your observation hockey whenever you are free?" "Of course I won't," Shiryu of the Rain answered without thinking about it. He would not use his observation haki anytime and anywhere, and what does that have to do with the current situation? Ross calmly said, then no one will find us. Buzz. The light distortion and sound distortion are activated simultaneously, and the traces of the ice block were instantly retracted from the sky. Unless someone carefully perceived them by using observation haki, the Marines will not notice any abnormalities. Looking at the Marine headquarters getting closer, Shiryu of the Rain knows that Ross has his reason to do so, but he still shows a trace of fear on his face. But when the two fell to a corner of the Marine headquarters port, the fear on Shiryu of the Rain's face became strange. No one found them out. No, it shouldn't be said that no one found them, but they seemed to be invisible. It was obvious that others had looked in their direction, but they couldn't see them. I can use my ability to manipulate light to become invisible. I can also conceal sound and make it silent. Ross explained this to Shiryu of the Rain calmly. For people like Shiryu of the Rain, Ross never expected to be able to make the other person submit from the heart at once, but he didn't need the other person submit, he just needs him to obey him first. And the combination of absolute power and infinite mystery, Shiryu of the Rain will not be able to raise any anti-oriented ideas and will behave as his second in command. Naturally. Maybe even the second in command will not be able to sit down in the future. Shiryu of the Rain has already roughly guessed this, but when listening to Ross, his eyes still flashed with a hint of fear, but Ross is now his own captain. The stronger and more mysterious he is, the better it is, and he does not want to follow a useless captain. Shiryu of the Rain looked at the battleship in the port and said, are we going to take the ship now? You can sneak into the building with your ability. It should be a lot easier to get a log pose. That's right. Ross nodded with a light in his eyes that made Shiryu of the Rain a little scared and said, but since Marine headquarters is here, I can't just go. Let me go and explore first. Explore? This is the Marine headquarters. You just got out of Impel Down and now you want to explore the Marine headquarters. What are you going to do after your little exploration? Destroy it. Shiryu of the Rain's forehead overflowed with a cold sweat, already feeling that his captain was a little crazy. The performance put on by him in Impel Down was completely different. Sure enough, is this a kind of guy that will live safest in prison? Wrong. It's not in prison. You hide here first and try not to expose yourself. I'll go in and have a look. Ross gave a command to Shiryu of the Rain, hid Shiryu of the Rain in a corner, took the broken ice quietly into the sea and then walked towards the Marine headquarters. Shiryu of the Rain looked at Ross's back with a complicated look and a trace of sweat on his forehead, muttering, it's really bad for you to mess with this guy, Marines. Marineford. Here is the Marine headquarters, also known as the world's strongest fortress. The huge harbor is like two round arms hugging each other, surrounded by the round sea. Once frozen into ice, it can form a platform huge enough to accommodate 100,000 people. Further up the front square of the Marine headquarters fortress, Ross's impression of the Marine headquarters is limited to his memory. This is the first time he had seen the grandeur of the Marine headquarters. Along the way, there were Marine lieutenant and even officers who appeared and passed by him, but they were not able to detect his presence. As long as someone does not use observation haki, they will not find Ross. Except for someone who is blind, no one will be bored enough to use Kenbenshoku observation. Naturally, Ross would not choose to go head-on, which is a highly exposed method, but he will fly in midair just to skim over Marine headquarters. The battlefield of the War of the Best is presented itself to Ross's eyes. Very good base. Ross's eyes twinkled with an inexplicable light, which seemed to others to be vague and crazy. What does the great sage equal to heaven wanted to do most when he jumped out of the 8 diagrams stove? Create havoc in heaven. What does he want to do the most after coming out of Impel Down? Destroy Marine headquarters. Quietly covering his traces, Ross fell to the corner of the fortress, found a single Marine captain in a secluded corner and grabbed his neck from behind. Gotcha. After killing the captain, Ross put on the other's clothes, using light distortion to make his face look slightly deformed, and at the same time, his cap is slightly lowered as he goes inside the Marine fortress. The inside of the fortress was quiet, with a repressed atmosphere, and occasionally a little voice was heard about the event in Impel Down. Rear Admiral, where is Vice Admiral Garp? Ross quickened his pace a little and went to the high floor. When he saw a Rear Admiral, he took the initiative and greeted him as if he was looking for someone. The Rear Admiral was holding a stack of documents and heard a few words from Ross. Vice Admiral Garp does not seem to be in the Marine headquarters. What? Ross, stare, is in place. The Rear Admiral seemed to be in a hurry. After responding, He hurried away. Although he vaguely felt that Ross's face was a bit strange, he did not really think about it. Here is the Marine headquarters, the world's strongest and most fortified fortress, and because of this, the vigilance of the many Marines within it has also dropped a lot, because who would dare to come to the Marine headquarters to cause trouble? Garp is not there. Very good. The expression of Ross' stare turned into a sneer, and he then went upstairs to the floor where Marine Admiral was. The atmosphere here is solemn, as the true core of Marines, or the highest level of Marines, both in the facilities and rooms. It is extremely spacious and bright. Ross did not release his observation haki to judge the existence of Admiral and Sengoku, because when he perceives them, they will also be able to perceive him, and this time he needs to be quiet. Quickly. He came to Akainu's door, knocked on it and went in. The room was large, but Akainu wasn't there. Only one Rear Admiral seemed to be working on something. He saw Ross pushing the door in, and Rear Admiral raised his head subconsciously.